What's up, my friends? Gabe here, and I just want to tell you about my new book that recently came out called Find the Fun. This is the culmination of, 15 plus years of game designing experience and publishing experience now, and also just distilling down 300 plus episodes of the Board Game Design Lab podcast and putting it all into one book. The book that I wish I had when I first got started designing games. And we dive into, obviously, fun and talking about how to find the fun and all the things that go along with that. Lots of different principles and little kind of formulas, trying to, some metaphors, trying to help that all make sense. Also talk a lot about product design and what it looks like to create not only a game but a product that people will want to buy, that you can pitch to publishers, that you can put on crowdfunding and make money. Talk a lot about playtesting, talk a lot about prototyping, just everything that goes into the game design and creation process, from idea all the way to being able to get it published. Now, I don't talk about business or starting an LLC or crowdfunding and that kind of thing, but everything else as far as creating the game and bringing it to life, putting it on people's tables so that they can enjoy it. And so I just want to tell you about it. You can find it on Amazon right now. Just check out the links down below if you want to learn more. I'm also going to put the first few chapters of the book at the end of this video. I hired a professional voiceover guy to do the audiobook version, and so I'm going to put the first few chapters here, and so you can check those out, listen to them, and just see if it's something that you're interested in. But yeah, find the fun. Really proud of this one. Wanted to let you know about it, and if you think it's something that you would get a lot of value out of, please check it out. Thanks for being part of the Board Game Design Lab community, and have an excellent day.
Find the Fun. Written by Gabe Barrett. Read by Adam Naranjo. Section 1. Getting Started. I'm so glad you've decided to travel down the game design path. It takes a ton of effort, but with a little creativity, a healthy dose of problem solving, and some good old-fashioned hard work, I know you can bring your games to life. And my goal is to be a helpful guide in your journey. Now, this book isn't meant to be an exhaustive resource. It's more of a curation of my best advice taken from designing games for 15 plus years and interviewing more than 300 of the best designers in the world through the Board Game Design Lab podcast. This is the book I wish someone had handed me years ago when I was just getting started. And I hope I can help you not waste time on as many dumpster fire games as I did. You're still going to create some truly awful games. That's just part of it. But the information in these pages should help you level up your design skills at a much faster rate than I was able to. This introduction will lay the foundation for the core concepts you need to understand, and the rest of the book will reinforce the concepts from various angles. So let's get into it. What is a board game, really? The traditional definition of board game is pretty self-explanatory: a game that involves moving pieces on a board. In recent years, the term has evolved to become a catch-all, and even games that don't include a board now fall under the board game umbrella. However, for the purposes of this book, that's not really what I'm talking about. Boards, cards, dice, etc. are just components, mere ingredients that can be turned into something much greater than the sum of its parts. In the same way you wouldn't say eggs, sugar, and butter are a cake, you wouldn't say cardboard, dice, and meeples are a board game. What matters is how you put them together to create an experience for the players. To put it simply, a board game is a fun engine. Players put time into it and get fun out of it. So as a designer, your main job is to maximize the time-to-fun ratio. Now, that's obviously easier said than done, but hopefully this book will help you start figuring out what it takes to create a fun engine that players enjoy and that you can turn into a marketable product. But anytime you see the word game in this book, just know that what I'm really saying is fun engine. For years, I designed games that worked but weren't particularly fun. However, once I started to understand games as fun engines, my designs got a ton more enjoyable to play. So even if that's the only concept you take away from this book, I think it'll level up your design skills by leaps and bounds. What makes a game fun? When you're starting out, you should aim to make a game that works. The game should have a clear beginning, middle, and end. The player should be able to understand how to win. and the player's decisions should move the game forward and ultimately to a defined finish. Now, a lot of new designers do all of that and think they're done. However, a game that works is not necessarily a proper fun engine. To make a game that's fun, you need to understand two main factors: choices and tension. A game can have amazing art, unbelievable miniatures, linen finish cards, and the most well-written rulebook you've ever laid eyes on. But if it doesn't have meaningful choices and the right amount of tension, it's not going to be particularly fun. In the next chapter, I'll dive much deeper into choices and tension. I'll unpack concepts like the choice trident and the Goldilocks decision space. And I'll get into various ways you can find the fun in your game. I'm mentioning this stuff briefly in the introduction since fun is probably the most important concept I'll discuss, hence the title of the book. And I want you to go ahead and put it at the top of your mind. What makes you a game designer? I've talked to so many new designers who don't yet consider themselves to actually be game designers. Typically, they think that to become a legitimate, card-carrying member of the club, they need to get a game published. But trust me, that is definitely not the case. A game designer is simply anyone who designs games. Don't overcomplicate it, and don't feel less than just because you don't have a game on a store shelf. I've played prototypes that were amazing, but never got picked up by a publisher. I've played published games that weren't worth the cardboard they were printed on. There's so many factors at play, and a lot of them are arbitrary. So don't get caught up on having to be published or any other random qualifier. The being comes from the doing, or put more simply, you are what you do. A writer is someone who writes. A painter is someone who paints. A game designer is someone who designs games. So the real question isn't, are you a game designer? That's a given. The real question is, how good can you be? And my goal throughout the rest of this book is to help you become as good as possible. It takes a tremendous amount of work to become good at any creative endeavor, but I believe you have it in you to bring some amazing games to life. Don't prove me wrong. What does a win look like? Before we go any further, it's important to take some time to define what you really want. When it comes to game design, what does a win look like? Do you want to design games as just a hobby, but you don't really care if you ever get anything published? Do you want to design games that eventually show up on store shelves, but it's just a side hustle? Do you want to pursue game design as a profession, either part-time or full-time? There's no wrong answer, but each path has different requirements and calls for a different level of sacrifice. I encourage you to be honest with yourself about what you really want and to think through how much you're willing to commit to that path. We often wonder why we feel like we're losing when the real problem is that we haven't defined what winning is. So what do you want? Write it down. What are you going to have to do to get there? What are you going to have to give up? Write those down too. Then, get to work. Why designing games is important. Several years ago, one of the most important people in my life found out he had cancer. His name was Randy, and he was an incredible mentor and an excellent friend. And during his battle with cancer, he discovered a little game called Ticket to Ride. One day I went over to his house, and he asked if I had ever heard of the game. I laughed and told him once or twice. Then we sat down and played it. Randy played Ticket to Ride hundreds of times over the next couple of years. He'd come home from chemo and played. Friends and family would come over to visit, and he'd introduce them to it. He played it literally until he couldn't hold his head up anymore. And just before they lowered his casket into the ground, his daughter placed a small red plastic train on it. Ticket to Ride brought my friend a tremendous amount of joy during his toughest times and darkest days. And a while back, when I met Alan Moon, the designer of the game, I was able to thank him for creating something that made my friend's final days just a bit more bearable. I don't know about you, but I want to create things that bring people joy like that. And this is a prime example of how much games matter. I know it can sometimes feel like game design is a waste of time. There are so many problems in the world, and we're just cutting out tokens and trying to figure out if a card should do 2 damage or 3. I mean, really? But please understand, it's so much deeper than that. Board games are different from other forms of entertainment because they're about a lot more than just sitting and absorbing content. Instead, games give players an active role in determining how the experience is going to play out. They give people the opportunity to not only enjoy a story, but also have an impact on how that story gets told. That means game designers are storytellers to the highest degree because what we're really creating is opportunities for others to tell great stories. We bring people together around a table to experience something that will hopefully build relationships and create lasting memories. So whenever you find yourself asking, does this even matter? The answer is yes. All artistic expressions come with their fair share of tough days, and designing board games is no different. But in those moments, just remind yourself that games matter, and they have the ability to improve people's lives. And just remember the impact a game had on my friend Randy. How to get ahead of 99% of other designers. Most game designers and creative people in general never make it out of the land of mediocrity and never realize their true potential for one simple reason: they give up. Typically, this is because they know how their game should play in their head, but they can't turn that into reality on a table. And that's because people develop taste before skill. In other words, they know what's good long before they can actually create something good. Then, because of the very large and obvious gap between where they are and where they want to be, they quit and move on to the next shiny object without ever realizing how much of an amazing designer they had it in them to be. This gets even worse when they start comparing their prototypes to other designers' published games. But if there's any absolute truth I've ever learned, it's this: comparison is the thief of joy. The world has no shortage of opportunities to compare yourself to others and feel like you're less than or behind. But for one thing, you don't know the whole story. You don't have any idea what someone went through or didn't have to go through to bring that game to life. And for another thing, it doesn't even matter anyway. The race is long, and in the end, it's only against yourself. So don't measure yourself against other designers. Measure against a previous version of yourself. Are you a better designer than you were a year ago? Are you learning a new skill today that's going to make you better tomorrow? If not, why not? What can you do to get better? If so, keep going. Keep finding ways to improve and push yourself forward. But the main thing is to just keep designing. Those 3 simple words are the key to you becoming the designer you have the potential to be. There's simply no substitute for reps. If you want to get better, you have to put your reps in. To put it in fitness terms, if you want to develop a stronger lower body, you should do more squats. Thinking about squats won't make you stronger. Reading about squats won't make you stronger. Posting online about squats won't make you stronger. You have to do the actual work, and it's the same with game design. So many designers never really get out of the planning stage. They have ideas, but they never create a prototype. They never run a single playtest. Unfortunately, it's super easy for planning to become procrastination. It seems like you're making progress as you research various topics and scribble down notes about dice-driven combat and possible worker placement locations. While this feels like movement, it's really like being stuck in the mud. Your tires might be spinning 100 miles an hour, but you aren't going anywhere. So how do you make sure you don't end up there like so many other designers? You make a prototype, you play test, and you repeat. It's just that simple. And it's just that hard. If you aren't doing those 2 things, you aren't actually going anywhere, and your game will never be more than an idea bouncing around in your head. In later chapters, I'll share my best advice on prototyping and playtesting. But if you don't turn that information into action, this is all a waste of time. 2 of the best things you can learn are to make ugly prototypes and to playtest terrible versions of your games. The better you get at these 2 things, the better designer you'll become. and you'll find yourself much further down the design road than all of the designers who stay stuck in the mud. As James Clear says, Rome wasn't built in a day, but they were laying bricks every hour. You have enough time. Over the years, I've had conversations with thousands of game designers, and the number one struggle they bring up over and over again is never having enough design time. And I get it. Life is busy. Everyone has more to do than they have time to do it in. Family, friends, work, sleep, traffic, cat videos. There's no shortage of things to occupy your time. However, something that radically changed my life was the realization that I always have just enough time for the things I make time for. It's not about having time, it's about making time. So I started putting game design into my weekly schedule, and then I protected that time. On certain days, at certain hours, I scheduled specific activities that were going to move my games forward. I also took this approach with the Board Game Design Lab podcast, which is how I released an episode 300 plus weeks in a row. And after the schedule was made, I died on those hills. My friends and family knew not to bother me on those days and times. Unless someone was bleeding from the head, I wasn't going to budge from my workspace. Another pivotal moment was when I stopped saying, I don't have time, and started saying, it's not a priority. It's amazing how much of a difference that small semantic tweak makes. Instead of saying, I need to playtest, but I don't have time, it became, I need to playtest, but it's not a priority. That phrase was just an incredible gut punch, and it helped me refocus. It also placed the weight squarely on my shoulders, which is where it belonged. I don't have enough time, put the blame on external factors. It was the universe's fault. But it's not a priority was on me. This also helped me get clear on what my priorities really were. There were moments when I would say something wasn't a priority, and I would realize that it really wasn't. The value of that kind of thing cannot be overstated. But my main point is that you have enough time. It's just a matter of what you're currently prioritizing. The average person spends 4 to 6 hours a day consuming online content, social media, Netflix, YouTube, etc. So if you happen to be an average person, that's about 5 hours per day you could probably repurpose. Manage your energy more than your time. Even if you're the best time manager in the world, if you show up to your design space physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually exhausted, you're probably not going to get much done. For your creativity to be at its best, you have to have energy for it to pull from. This means it's better to have a little time and a lot of energy than a lot of time but little energy. An energetic 20 minutes is much more productive than a lackadaisical 2 hours. So managing your energy through getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, controlling stress, exercising regularly, etc., will make the biggest impact in your game design journey. A life in shambles can be useful if you're writing music, but it's not particularly helpful when you're designing a worker placement game. And yes, this is common sense, but unfortunately, living it out isn't particularly common. On a near weekly basis, game designers tell me they struggle to find or make time for game design. However, the truth is, they're not properly taking care of themselves, which leads to low energy levels overall and tends to manifest as lowest common denominator living, which usually consists of scrolling their phones for hours on end. And if these designers, myself included, were more intentional with their energy, limited time would be much less of a factor. The most creative and productive days I've ever had as a designer weren't the days that I had the most time. They were the days that I felt like I had been shot out of a cannon because I was optimizing my energy. It's called flow state, not float state. Getting into a design flow is active and requires constant adjustments and pivots in what you're doing and thinking, which requires energy. You're not just floating along randomly, bumping into good ideas. And when you're tired or hangry or stressed or worse, flow becomes float, and you end up more likely to waste a bunch of time scrolling through social media than actually being productive. So yes, be intentional with your schedule and make time for game design as best you can. But be even more intentional with your energy. There are few things that have made a bigger impact on my own ability to bring games to life and to market, and I have a feeling you might experience similar results. Habits, not goals. Several years ago, I spent some time trying to figure out what I wanted to accomplish as a game designer. What did I want my life to look like? What types of games did I want to make? What kind of community did I want to build? What skills did I need to learn, etc.? I figured that if I could get a decent idea of where I wanted to go, I would work my way backwards to effectively reverse engineer the path I wanted to take. I knew I wanted to go pro in the gaming industry, and I wanted most or all of my income to be generated through things related to designing and publishing games. So I put together a plan that would hopefully make that happen. However, that plan didn't include any goals. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with setting goals, and if that works well for you, then please don't let me stop you. But one of the main things I learned from playing sports for most of my life is that building habits is far more important than setting and chasing goals. So I didn't set a goal to get a game on a store shelf or run a successful crowdfunding campaign. Instead, I thought through the habits I needed to develop that would make success inevitable. Designing games and bringing them to market would just be a side effect generated by the habits I would cultivate daily. These habits included things like working on something design-related every day, running a weekly playtest, interviewing at least 5 people per month to learn more about specific topics, etc. And because of the habits I built over the course of several years, I eventually made games my full-time job. However, that actually felt less like an accomplishment and more like a regular Tuesday. It was just a natural byproduct of how I was approaching each day, week, and month of my life. And I didn't know exactly when it would happen, but I knew I was on a trajectory to get there eventually. Now, your mileage may vary with this type of approach, and I know lots of people who prefer the highs and lows of chasing goals. But personally, I continue to enjoy the steady grind of habit formation and optimization and find it to be far more helpful to get where I want to go. So what habits do you need to start or stop? What habits would help you get where you want to go in your own design journey? What habits would make success inevitable? Now what? All right, I realize this opening chapter is a bit existential and more about setting yourself up for creative success than about game design specifically. However, I wanted to start things off with the general core concepts I think you need to understand if you really want to design great games people love. But now let's start diving a bit deeper into various aspects of bringing a game to life. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Quote, "Game design is not a science. There's no fixed methodology or a tick list that will lead to great designs. Game design is an art, and each artist has their own style." Rainer Knizia. Section 2. Designing a Game. Chapter 2. Where to Start. The first stage of game design can be the most exciting, but also the most challenging. Usually something will spark an idea and make you think, that would be a cool game. But then what? Turning an idea into a playable experience can seem like a monumental task, and it's often so overwhelming to think about that many people just leave the idea in their heads. So this section aims to guide you through the initial steps of the game design process, providing a solid foundation for your creative journey. Where to start? The best thing you can do is simply start getting ideas out of your head. Write down everything that comes to mind. Write down the bad ideas that you'll erase later. Write down placeholder ideas to bridge the gap from one thought to another. Don't hold anything back, and don't worry so much about organization or critiquing your ideas. There will be plenty of time for that later. Just get as many thoughts out as possible. Once they're out, you can start figuring out everything else. And remember that most great writers are actually great rewriters. And in the same way, most great game designers are actually great redesigners. To help get you started, here are some things to think about, write down, and/or do as you flesh out the design. Number 1. Identify your vision and goals. The first step in designing a game is to clarify your vision. What kind of experience do you want to create? What emotions or themes are you aiming to evoke? Are you designing the game for fun, to share with friends, or do you have aspirations for commercial success? Your goals will influence many decisions down the line. Establishing your game's purpose helps guide your design choices and keep your project focused. Also, set realistic goals. For example, if you're just getting into game design, it's unlikely you'll be able to create an epic, 4-hour space opera-type game. And taking on more than you can handle might leave you pretty discouraged and frustrated. My first design was a zombie game with a massive board and a ton of characters who all had asymmetrical and unique abilities. Fun fact, the game was called Fortnite because you had to survive for 2 weeks. This was about a decade before a certain video game came out, but I don't think I could use that title now. I managed to make the first prototype and run a playtest, but I quickly realized that my ideas were much bigger than my current design ability, and I had no idea how to fix the 100 issues wrong with the game. After that first test, I shelved the game and never came back to it. Instead, I started trying to make much smaller, shorter games. Of course, those ideas were also way too big, and it would be a while before I managed to actually finish a design. Luckily, I'm a very stubborn and sometimes creatively obsessive person, so I refused to let all that early failure and discouragement run me off. However, a lot of people run into that first brick wall and turn around and walk away. I chose to keep slamming my head into it for a while. But you can set yourself up for success by having realistic expectations and setting attainable goals that line up with your current aptitude. In the wise words of Ira Glass, nobody tells this to people who are beginners. I wish someone told me. All of us who do creative work, we get into it because we have good taste. But there's this gap. For the first couple years you make stuff, it's just not that good. It's trying to be good. It has potential, but it's not. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, is still killer, and your taste is why your work disappoints you. A lot of people never get past this phase. They quit. Most people I know who do interesting, creative work went through years of this. We know our work doesn't have this special thing that we want it to have. We all go through this. And if you're just starting out, or you're still in this phase, you gotta know it's normal, and the most important thing you can do is do a lot of work. Put yourself on a deadline, so that every week you will finish one story. It is only by going through a volume of work that you will close that gap, and your work will be as good as your ambitions. And I took longer to figure out how to do this than anyone I've ever met. It's going to take a while. It's normal to take a while. You've just got to fight your way through. Taste comes before skill. That's why you can play a game and see how good it is long before you can create a game that's good. So don't get discouraged. Just keep going. Keep designing. Keep learning and growing and figuring out how to bring your ideas to life. Number 2, define your audience. Who are you designing the game for? Understanding your target audience is crucial. Different players seek different experiences. Some prefer strategy-heavy games while others enjoy casual party games. Consider age range, interests, and the complexity level of your audience. Tailoring your game to its intended players increases the likelihood of creating an engaging and successful game. And please, don't say everyone. A game for everyone is a game for no one. And even if you manage to design and finish such a game, it'll likely be pretty forgettable, since a game for everyone has to be incredibly generic. When I'm first starting a new design, I create a game avatar for it. I write down all the specifics about the ideal player I'm aiming at, and this gives me a great decision filter throughout the design process. I would much rather create something that is a small group of people's favorite game and hated by others, instead of creating something that people in general think is just okay and forget about it 15 minutes later. So in my game avatar document, I put things like, enjoys rolling dice, only has 30 minutes to play, has young kids so can only play 1 or 2 player games, loves dramatic endings, etc. and this helps me guide the design to line up with who the game is for. The avatar is always subject to change, but writing down what my ideal player and customer wants provides helpful guardrails as I make changes and slowly bring the game to life. Number 3. Inspirations and examples. As you immerse yourself in the world of board games and play a wide range of games to understand various mechanisms, themes, and what makes a game enjoyable, you'll find a never-ending stream of ideas and inspiration. And if you're like me, you'll find yourself breaking down games and thinking through ways to repurpose mechanisms and change things according to your own methods and style. When I'm writing down my initial vision for a design, I'll often see several games that I'm drawing inspiration from and the specific things about those games that get me excited. For example, I might put Pandemic. The game's tension increases over time, leading players to a dramatic finish. Or Dominion. The card market is different every game, which leads to more replayability. The inspiration could be mechanical, thematic, experiential, or a combination of all three. But writing down the inspirations for a game can be super helpful as I work through the design process, and it's especially helpful when the game has been on the shelf for a while and I come back to it later. After I started designing games, I realized that I can no longer simply play games. Every game night became an opportunity to do research on what works and what doesn't, and it helped me to keep up with industry trends and see where my game ideas might fit in the current market. But what made the research extra helpful was writing down my experiences and creating a system that made it easy to reference back to later. 4. The core concept. Something I learned later in my design journey is to start with a simple core concept or mechanism that will be the centerpiece of the game. This could be a unique gameplay mechanism, a compelling story, or an innovative theme. But the core concept should be engaging enough to build the rest of the game around. It's basically the game's hook. It's the first thing you would tell a gamer to make them want to learn more about the game. From a marketing standpoint, it's the thing you would put in an ad that would get someone to stop scrolling. So what is it about your game that's different and interesting? You don't have to come up with something hyper-innovative that's never been done before or anything. But what makes your game stand out against the rest? Remember, simplicity at this stage is key, and complexity can be added later. But figuring out the game's core concept and overall hook will make things so much easier as you bring it to life. Things are always subject to change, of course, but at least you'll have a direction to move in. 5. Theme. What's the game about? Who are the players? Why are they competing, working together, or both? Where are they? When are they? If you already have a mechanism for the game, what theme would complement it? The answers to these kinds of questions will help you bring the world around the game to life. Some games are full of lore and backstory, and a book worth of flavor text. Other games have a theme so thinly pasted on that it runs the risk of coming off with the shrink wrap. And either way can work. It just depends on the game and experience you're going for. But theme helps players understand their place in the game's world. And when done well, theme can help players understand how the game works. Some designers prefer to start with theme and then figure out mechanisms that support that theme. Other designers prefer a mechanism-first approach. Both methods are viable, and it can change depending on the game. The key word is start. Please note that the words theme and setting often get interchanged and used to mean the same thing. However, they're technically different things. I was recently chatting with Johnny Pack about this topic, and this is how he put it. Theme is what players are doing. Setting is the overall place, time, and genre. For example, Wild West is the setting. Robbing banks is the theme. Outer space is the setting. Fighting aliens and mining for resources is the theme. The Caribbean is the setting. Being a pirate looking for booty is the theme. But more generally, we can label theme to encompass all of this, and we tend to all the time. In the context of this book, anytime you see the word theme, just know that I'm referring to both what players are doing and the game's overall setting. Constantly making the distinction gets long-winded and confusing. 6. Mechanisms. How does the game work? What mechanisms can be intertwined with the theme to bring it to life? What systems can you combine or present in interesting ways? What actions do players take on a turn? How do players interact with the game and each other? The answers to these kinds of questions are all subject to change, but go ahead and develop a framework for how the game plays. If you're unsure about something, just use a placeholder. For example, I've run playtests for games I knew would have combat, but that system wasn't ready, so I just flipped a coin to determine who won and then moved on to the next phase of the game. There are so many options, and it can be hard to determine which mechanism to use. I mean, there are at least 47 ways you could do worker placement. So try a bunch of things and see what works best. I like to work on one mechanism or system at a time and then put things together after they work individually. For example, I'll work on a game's movement system and then spend time on the combat system. Once those systems work well on their own, I'll combine them and figure out how they can work together. I find this approach to be much easier than trying to create everything all at once. Focusing on one part of the game at a time helps me gain momentum and score little victories, which leads to less overwhelm and a greater likelihood that I'll finish the game overall. Please note that the words mechanism and mechanic often get interchanged and used to mean the same thing, a specific process or system that the game has for achieving an outcome. For example, some people call deck building a mechanism, while others call it a mechanic. However, for the purpose of this book, and based on my own preference, mechanism will refer to a specific system or process in a game, while mechanics will refer to all the systems or processes working together. 7. Key moments. How do you win? How does the game end? What are the interesting things a player can do on a turn? What helps bring the game to a satisfying conclusion? The answers to these kinds of questions will ultimately determine your game's overall experience and will often alter your choices for the game's theme and mechanisms. I like to start here and then figure out the rest. For example, if I know I want the game to end with a dramatic stand-up dice roll, I design the rest of the game to lead up to that moment. Or if I want the players to feel a certain emotion as they play, I can be more intentional with my theme and mechanism choices. If I want players to feel like they're doing taxes, I'll design a Euro game with lots of beige. I'm just kidding, mostly. But when you know where you want to go, it's much easier to figure out how to get there. 8. Sculptor or painter. There are two types of game designers. Some are sculptors, who begin with a massive chunk of ideas and slowly refine, cut, and chisel away at things until the game becomes what they want. And some are painters, who begin with a blank canvas and slowly add things to it until the game becomes what they want. Neither type is better than the other. It just comes down to personal preference and sometimes changes depending on the project. However, realizing I was a sculptor made me feel a lot better about my personal design process. It's kind of like that old quote about a smart fish thinking it's stupid if it's judged based on its ability to climb trees. For a while, I thought I was a bad designer because all my games started off as a big chaotic mess that had to be cut down by 75% just to be mediocre. Why couldn't I just start with a simple mechanism and make a game out of it? But after I realized I'm a sculptor, and this is simply how my design brain works, I became a lot more confident in my process. So I hope figuring out which type you are will bring you a bit more confidence as well. 9. Document your process. Keep detailed records of your design process. Document changes made, feedback received, and your thoughts during development. And don't forget to write down why you made a change. I can't tell you how many times I've come back to a design after several months and couldn't remember why certain aspects of the game had been altered. Then, inevitably, I make the same mistakes and waste time that could have been saved with a simple note to self. If you end up working with a developer or publisher, the notes can also be super helpful to them and explain why certain decisions have been made. This could save them time and/or money and potentially get your game on the market faster. Documenting your process can also be useful later if you decide to create a design diary that you share online. People love getting a behind-the-scenes look at how a game was created, and it can be a more compelling way to market your game than a social media ad. But design diaries are much easier to write when you already have notes instead of trying to remember everything from the last 3 years. 10. Stay organized and patient. No matter how many years of experience you have, game design is a process that often takes longer than anticipated. Stay organized, set deadlines for yourself, and be patient. Good games take time to develop. So set realistic expectations and embrace the process. Whenever I start to get frustrated or annoyed with how long a game is taking, I remind myself that designing games is hard, and this is what hard feels like. That usually helps me refocus and get back to work. 11. Engage with the community. Designing games can feel isolating, but it works best when you're involved in a community. So join online communities, find local gaming groups, and attend conventions. Engaging with gamers and other designers can provide support, advice, and networking opportunities. Learning from and contributing to the community is invaluable for a new game designer, and helping others is an excellent way to figure out solutions to your own design challenges. The more you help others, the more they want to help you, and everyone benefits. In a lot of industries, the ladder climbers end up at the top. However, in the board game space, it's the ladder builders who tend to find the most success. If you have a Facebook account, I welcome you to join the Board Game Design Lab community. It's the largest group of designers on the internet, and it's the most helpful and encouraging place you'll find. Conclusion. Starting your game design journey is about laying a solid foundation and building upon it systematically. By understanding your game's vision, knowing its audience, iterating based on feedback, and staying engaged with the community, you can transform your game idea into an enjoyable and polished final product. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Involve other humans all along the way and observe them playing with humility and empathy. When designing, be playful and experiment. Matt Leacock. Chapter 3. Protecting your creativity. Why new game designers shouldn't fear idea theft. For many aspiring designers, the fear of someone stealing their game ideas can be paralyzing. It's an understandable concern. After all, your ideas are a product of your creativity and hard work. However, this fear, while common, is often misplaced and can hinder your growth and development. In this chapter, we'll explore why new game designers should focus more on development and less on the fear of idea theft. 1. Ideas are just the starting point. The first thing to recognize is that an idea in isolation is rarely enough to make a successful game. The real value of game design relies in the execution of that idea. How it's developed, the mechanisms involved, the storytelling, how it engages players, the overall experience, etc. These elements, which are unique to each designer's approach and style, are much harder to replicate. That means sharing your idea for feedback and improvement is often more beneficial than guarding it. Also, the greatest idea in the world, if poorly executed, will be a flop. The magic is in how the idea gets brought to life on the table. 2. The board game community values originality. The board game community, including publishers and fellow designers, places a high value on originality and creator credit. The culture within this community often self-polices against plagiarism and respects intellectual property. The industry is also rather small, and the reputation of a game publisher or designer would be severely damaged if they were caught stealing, which acts as an excellent deterrent. 3. Collaboration over competition. In many cases, sharing your ideas with others can lead to collaboration, which can enhance your game's development. Feedback from other designers, playtesters, and potential players is invaluable for refining and improving your game. Holding your idea too close could deprive you of these growth opportunities and stifle your creativity. Plus, it's much easier and more beneficial for a publisher to license your game than steal it. 4. The market is massive. The industry is fairly small, but the board game market is vast and diverse, with room for tons of ideas and genres. The likelihood of your exact idea being stolen and turned into a mass-produced game is effectively zero. In most cases, Similar ideas can coexist in the market, each finding its unique audience. I think I've seen at least 10 games about mushrooms of all things in the last year, and many of them have done rather well. They all approach the theme from a different angle and provide a different experience. The designers all started with a similar premise, but the final products were vastly different. 5. Legal protections are limited, but you can do some things to help. While it's true that protecting a game legally is challenging, as copyright law does not cover ideas or mechanisms, there are steps you can take to make theft less likely. Documenting the development process, keeping a design diary, and sharing your game's journey online with others makes your game less likely to be plagiarized, since it'll be easier to prove it was stolen. Also, your written rules do fall under copyright, so if someone copy-pastes the rules from your rulebook, you can take action. However, in 15 years of creating games, I've only seen this happen twice, and it got called out and rectified almost immediately both times. I'm not a lawyer, but I firmly believe your focus should be on creating a great game instead of wasting time and money trying to figure out how to safeguard your idea. 6. The value of sharing and openness. Sharing your game's development process can lead to community support, networking opportunities, and even potential partnerships. The positive effects of being an active and open member of the game design community far outweigh the risks of idea theft. The initial process of creating a game is often very isolating, but the quicker you can get it in front of others, and the more ideas and information you can solicit from them, the better off your game will be. Could someone steal your idea? In theory, sure. But designing without the help of others almost guarantees your idea won't be good enough to be worth selling. Conclusion. While the fear of having your game idea stolen is natural, it's important to understand that the path to a successful game design is through development, collaboration, and community engagement. Focusing on these aspects, rather than the unlikely event of idea theft, will likely lead to a more fruitful and enjoyable game design experience. Your unique vision and execution are your true assets. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Playtest with varied groups. Always using the same players will develop the game away from the beginners and will threaten to narrow the appeal even at the top. Richard Garfield. Chapter 4. Identifying your game's target audience. One of the most critical steps in designing a board game is identifying your target audience. Knowing who your game is for helps you make informed decisions about its design, complexity, theme, and marketing. This chapter will guide you through the process of pinpointing your game's intended players, an essential factor in creating a successful and engaging game. 1. Define the player experience. Start by defining the experience you want to offer. Is your game a fast-paced party game, a deep strategy game, or a family-friendly activity? The experience you aim to create will largely indicate the type of audience you should target. For example, a complex strategy game might appeal to experienced gamers, while a lighthearted, easy-to-learn game could be more suitable for families or casual players. Player experience is the best decision filter you can have. Once that gets determined, everything you do just needs to point back to it. If it doesn't point back to it effectively, it gets removed. 2. Consider age range. Age can be a significant factor in determining your target audience. Games designed for children need to be simple, with minimal text and engaging visuals. On the other hand, games for adults can include complex rules and mature themes. And games for families need to find a good mix of complexity to keep everyone engaged. Also, always specify an age range on your game, as this is one of the first things potential publishers, players, and buyers will look for. 3. Analyze interest and themes. What themes or interests does your game cater to? If your game is based around a specific theme, such as science fiction, historical events, or fantasy, consider the fans of these genres. A game with a niche theme might have a smaller but more dedicated audience, while a game with a broad, appealing theme could attract a wider range of players. But as I said before, I think it's better to really lean into a certain audience's preferences and create a game that they love and others hate, instead of making something that people in general find just okay and forget about in 15 minutes. 4. Determine complexity and length. The complexity and playtime of your game are crucial in defining your audience. Casual gamers usually prefer games that are easy to learn and can be played in a short period, while hardcore gamers are typically more inclined towards games that offer deeper strategic depth and longer play sessions. Assess your game's complexity and length honestly to target the right audience. If your game's playtime doesn't line up with your target audience, you have to make changes. A good game that drags on for too long is no longer a good game, but too long is completely up to the people playing it. So make sure the game's complexity and length line up with your target audience's expectations. 5. Assess learning curve and accessibility. Consider how easy it is to learn your game. A steep learning curve might deter casual players, but can be appealing to gamers who enjoy a challenge. Learning the rules is the number one barrier to playing a game, so make sure the rulebook is as clear and easy to absorb as possible. A hard-to-learn rulebook leads to gamers playing something else, or just watching Netflix. Also, think about the accessibility of your game. Does it accommodate players with different abilities, eyesight limitations, etc.? This can broaden or specify your audience. 6. Look at similar games. Research games that are similar to yours in theme, mechanism, or style. Who are their fans? Understanding the audience of comparable games can give you insights into who might enjoy your game and how to cater to them. However, be cautious not to assume that your game will attract the exact same audience or sales numbers. And from a more philosophical standpoint, never forget that comparison is the thief of joy. 7. Use playtesting feedback. Playtesting provides valuable insights into your target audience. Notice who enjoys your game the most, and ask for feedback directly about who the testers think would like it. This real-world testing can often reveal audience segments you hadn't initially considered. Nothing beats the type of market research you get from people actually playing the game. So the sooner you can start getting things in front of people, the better. 8. Define your audience, but remain flexible. While it's important to define your target audience, stay flexible. Be open to the idea that your game might resonate with a different group than you initially anticipated. Sometimes games find their audience organically, and part of the design process is adapting to this discovery. I've designed several games that were targeted at a certain audience, but playtesting revealed they were much better fits for a totally different group of people. When this happens, sometimes it means changing the game to be a better fit for the originally intended audience. Other times it means leaning into the unexpected audience's preferences. Either path can be successful, but the key point is to be intentional with who your game is for. Conclusion. Identifying your target audience is a critical part of the game design process. It influences many aspects of your game, from mechanisms to marketing to everything in between. By understanding who your game is for, you can tailor your design to meet their preferences, increasing the chances of your game resonating with its intended players. But keep in mind that the audience might evolve over time, and be prepared to adapt your game to meet the needs and expectations of its players. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Know your audience. Different games are fun for different types of players. Knowing the level of mechanics, rules, and interactions that your target audience wants and can handle will help craft a game that they find fun to play. Erica Bouyeris. Chapter 5. Game design is product design. If you want to see your game on store shelves, it's essential to recognize that game design is not just a creative endeavor, but also a form of product design. Understanding this and what it means for your game's overall design gives you a much better chance of bringing a game to market and ensuring its success. In this chapter, we'll dive into why viewing game design through the lens of product design is beneficial and how it can shape your approach to creating games. 1. Understanding the market and audience. Like any product, a board game must meet the needs and preferences of its target market. This requires understanding who the game is for, what they enjoy, and what gaps exist in the current market. By researching trends, player preferences, and successful games, you can design a game that appeals to a specific audience, much like a product designed to satisfy a particular consumer need. Many designers, including myself, often start with, "What game would I like to play?" and then try to bring it to life. Being the target audience makes things a bit easier, and the design process feels less like a grind. Not a whole lot less, especially by the end, but every little bit helps. However, many starting points are viable, and it can even be helpful to begin by thinking about the audience you have in mind even before thinking about the theme, mechanism, etc. This is where having a specific gamer avatar, as mentioned in Chapter 1 of this section, can be a guiding light to creating a game that is viable in the marketplace. 2. Balancing creativity and functionality. In product design, functionality and usability are as important as aesthetic appeal. Similarly, a well-designed game balances creative elements like theme, story, and art with functional aspects such as rules clarity, mechanisms, and playability. A game that's visually stunning but difficult to play, or vice versa, may not resonate with players. There are outliers, of course. Sometimes a game's rulebook is a mess, or it looks a bit ugly set up on a table, but it still sells a lot of copies and finds a fan base. However, I've learned to never think or assume my game will be an outlier. Instead, I assume that I'm not going to get lucky at all, so I need to make sure my game is set up for success in every possible way. Then, lucky breaks feel like a nice bonus instead of being something I need to succeed. People buy games based on how they look, but they play games over and over again and recommend them to others based on how they play. And with thousands of games coming out every year, you'll need to create a game that appeals to consumers on all levels if you want to sell more than a handful of copies. I realize it can be overwhelming to think about theme, gameplay, aesthetics, etc., all at once. So it can be helpful to focus on just one aspect at a time. This is also why partnering with a good publisher can be invaluable, and I'll go into more detail about that in Section 8. 3. Product considerations. Product designers must consider manufacturing process, materials, and costs, and these factors are equally vital in game design. The quality of components, packaging, and the overall product value can significantly impact the game's marketability and appeal. Decisions about the game's components also affect its retail price, a crucial factor in the minds of potential publishers and ultimately the consumers who would be buying the game. Whether you plan to pitch to publishers or publish the game yourself, having at least a general idea about how much each component in your game costs and designing with those costs in mind is extremely important when it comes to meeting the expectations of your target market. A casual game with a $100 price tag probably isn't going to do very well. Something I find helpful is to have a specific box size in mind from the very beginning of a design. It doesn't have to be down to the millimeter or anything, but just having an idea of how much physical space I have to work with is super helpful in determining things like card count, board size, etc. For example, if I'm designing a $20 solo game that comes in a small box, I know my card count maxes out around 100, and I have enough room for a small number of other components like cubes and dice. To get a sense of industry norms, take a look at the box sizes of games on your shelf and in stores, and then take note of how many components fit in there and what the game's cost is. In the past, most games were sold in physical stores, so a lot of publishers made their game boxes way bigger than they needed to be in an attempt to stand out better on the shelf. However, since most games are now sold online, most publishers are choosing smaller boxes to cut down on manufacturing and shipping costs. Speaking of shipping costs, that's another thing to have in mind when creating a game for the marketplace, since it's definitely going to be important to potential customers. A $20 game that costs $15 to ship is going to be a hard sell. So be aware of not only component count, but also component weight. A question I often ask is, does this component justify its cost? If adding a certain piece or deck of cards is going to increase the cost to manufacture and/or ship the game, it has to increase the game's perceived value in how it's either played, viewed, or marketed. And perceived is the key word here. It's more about the customer's perceived value than what an extra component actually means to a game. For example, the game Everdell has a massive cardboard tree that doesn't really do anything other than hold cards. But the tree makes the game look incredible, and draws players into the game's theme much better than just having the cards spread out on the table. 4. Production consideration. Just as product designers prototype, test, and refine their products, board game designers must do the same through playtesting and product testing. The playtesting process is about identifying and fixing issues in gameplay. However, it's equally important to test the game as an overall product to ensure it's enjoyable, engaging, and accessible from the time the player picks up the box to the time they put it away. It's about refining the product, the game, to create the best experience possible. I'll go into much greater detail on gameplay playtesting in Section 4, and it's probably the most important part of the game design process. But for now, just be aware that testing is about a lot more than balancing mechanisms and tweaking numbers. How does the game look on a table? How does it look in social media posts? How does it fit in the box? Is it easy and intuitive to set up and put away? Do the colors, cardboard layouts, fonts, and components create an accessible experience? Is the rulebook clear with plenty of examples and graphics? How hard are the rules to learn and teach? Does the box open easily but stay closed when you hand it to someone? Are the components easy to organize inside the box? Are the tokens easy to pick up, etc.? These are the kinds of questions to be asking as players engage with your game's overall and entire experience. A great game that fails as a product is doomed from the start, so make sure you're testing every aspect of your game to make it as good as it can be. And once you have good data about the overall product, make changes. Don't let pride or ego get in the way and hamper your game in the process. If players are having a hard time setting the game up, learning the rules, understanding the iconography, etc., don't blame them. Fix the hang-ups to make things as smooth as possible. If someone chooses to play your game over the near infinite number of other things they could have chosen, don't disappoint them, especially with something that could have been fixed with a little more work in the testing stage. 5. Marketing and branding. In product design, how a product is marketed and branded plays a critical role in its success, and board games are no different. Effective branding, from the game's name to its visual identity and how it's positioned in the market, can attract attention and differentiate it from competitors. Understanding marketing strategies and channels is crucial for a game's viability and success, and this applies to both publishers and designers. I will go into more detail about naming a game later in this section, so for now I just want to focus on setting your game up for general marketing success. Even if you plan to pitch your game to a publisher, there are still certain things you can do to help your game have a better chance in the marketplace, which will also make it more likely that your game gets signed by a publisher. The best thing you can have is a captivating hook that intrigues people and makes them eager to learn more. Whether it's text-based or visual, it should compel a person to stop and explore further. For example, the hook for Scythe from Stonemaier Games is, Scythe is an engine-building, asymmetric, competitive board game set in an alternate history 1920s period. It is a time of farming and war, broken hearts and rusted gears, innovation and valor. Then combine that with beautiful classic artwork that mixes giant mechs with farmers, and it's no wonder the game has sold over 1 million copies. Stonemaier takes a similar approach with best-selling game Viticulture. Old-world Tuscany awaits your winemaking skill and strategic cunning. You'll plant vines, harvest grapes, age wines, and fill merchant orders to create the greatest winery in Italy. And then the artwork on the box cover and product shots reinforces this hook. Stonemaier Games is a great example of how to build a brand with provocative hooks and attractive artwork. Combine that with the games being genuinely fun to play, and it's no wonder why the company has become such a force in the hobby gaming industry. So what's your game's hook? Does it describe your game's experience and get someone to stop scrolling and want to learn more? A good hook opens up a loop in a potential customer's mind that they have to learn more about your game in order to close. Our brains hate open loops. So what loops are being opened by your game's tagline, box art, component images, mechanisms, etc.? The better you open the loop, the more attention you'll get. The better you close the loop, the more sales you'll get. 6. Regulatory compliance and safety. All products sold on the open market must adhere to safety standards and regulations, and this is true for board games as well. Ensuring that your game complies with safety standards, especially if it's intended for children, is an important aspect of the design process. This includes using non-toxic materials and ensuring that small parts are not a choking hazard. This is something a publisher takes care of at the factory level by paying for product safety testing, and the paperwork is required to accompany large shipments when games are clearing customs. If you're licensing your game to a publisher, this isn't something you need to worry about. But if you're publishing a game, talk to your manufacturer about their process and costs. Not having the proper paperwork can cause long and costly delays when importing games. However, at the designer level, if you want to create anything that uses non-standard components, make sure to do some research on the feasibility from a production level before you travel too far down that design path. For example, a game that utilizes smell or taste could have some regulatory and safety issues depending on the country. Also, a game with custom plastic components might also have issues depending on how breakable it is, the target audience, the materials used to create it, etc. The main thing is to understand the possible issues you could run into and to make sure you're checking all the necessary boxes. Conclusion. Approaching game design as product design offers a helpful framework for creating games that are not only creatively fulfilling, but also market-ready and appealing to your target audience. It involves a balance of artistic vision with practical considerations for functionality, production, marketing, and user experience. By understanding and embracing these aspects, you can increase your chances of creating a successful game that resonates with players and thrives in a competitive market. Realizing I was just as much a product designer as I am a game designer was a huge shift in my thinking several years ago, and it was one of the main ways I leveled up my ability not only to find the fun, but also to be able to effectively share it with others. I hope a similar realization will help you just as much. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Be very clear about the story you wish to tell and try to ensure that the mechanisms you apply serve that story. Martin Wallace. Chapter 6. Embracing Simplicity. When first getting started, it's natural for designers to be filled with ambitious ideas. However, one of the key principles in game design is to start simple. Creating the simplest version of your game before adding complexity can lead to a more refined, engaging, and ultimately successful game. This chapter explores why beginning with simplicity is a winning strategy in game design. 1. Clarifying core mechanisms. Starting simple allows you to focus on and refine your game's core mechanisms, and it's essential to establish what makes your game unique and enjoyable before adding additional layers. This approach ensures that the foundation of your game is solid and that every added element has a purpose and enhances the core experience. 2. Identifying and solving problems. A simpler version of your game makes it easier to identify and address issues. Complexity can mask underlying problems, making them harder to spot and fix. By starting with a basic prototype, you can quickly see what works and what doesn't, allowing for more efficient troubleshooting and refinement. 3. Streamlining the learning curve. Board games need to be accessible and easy to learn, especially for newer players. A game that is too complex from the outset can be daunting and off-putting. By starting simply, you can create a more approachable learning curve, gradually introducing players to the game's mechanisms and strategic depth. 4. Facilitating more productive playtesting. Simpler games are easier for playtesters to understand and provide feedback on. This leads to more effective playtesting sessions as testers can focus on the core gameplay rather than getting lost in complicated rules or mechanisms. Early playtests should be about gauging the game's fundamental appeal, not managing its intricacies. 5. Reducing development time and costs. Developing the simplest version of your game first can significantly reduce both time and cost. Complexity adds layers of development, testing, and production cost. By building a simple prototype, you can iterate faster and more economically, allowing for a more agile and flexible design process. 6. Creating space for organic growth. Often the best features of a game arise organically during the development process. Starting with a simple foundation provides the space for such organic growth. And as you playtest and iterate, you'll naturally find opportunities to add complexity and depth where it feels necessary and beneficial. 7. Ensuring coherence and balance. A simpler game is easier to balance and keep coherent. As you add complexity, it's vital to maintain the game's balance and ensure that all elements work harmoniously together. Starting simple gives you a clear overview, making it easier to maintain this balance as you gradually add new components or rules. 8. Appreciating the power of elegance. There's a beauty in simplicity and elegance in design. Some of the most beloved and enduring games are those with straightforward, elegant mechanisms that provide depth and replayability. By aiming for simplicity, you're striving for an elegance that can make your game both accessible and captivating. Conclusion. Starting with the simplest version of your game is not about limiting creativity. It's about building a strong foundation upon which complexity can be meaningfully added. It allows for a focused, efficient, and player-friendly development process. As a new designer, embracing simplicity can be your greatest ally in creating a game that is enjoyable, engaging, and ready for success. Most designers start out trying to create their magnum opus and then get frustrated when they can't make it work. For some, this frustration leads to walking away from game design forever. However, if those designers had started small and tried to create a simple game with fewer concepts, they would have had a much easier time bringing a game to life. Also, a few early wins do a great job of building confidence and momentum, which can propel you even further down the design path. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Design with the player in mind. Watch people's first reactions to the game and be honest about what you see. If someone has a hard time getting it or expects things that aren't there, that's not a problem with them, it's a problem with the game. James Ernest. Chapter 7. Creating a minimum viable product. For aspiring gamers, starting a new project can be an exhilarating yet daunting experience. One of the biggest challenges is avoiding the trap of overcomplicating things. This chapter dives into the concept of a minimum viable product, or MVP, and explains how it can be a game changer in transforming your grand ideas into playable prototypes. 1. Understanding minimum viable product. An MVP is essentially the most basic version of your game idea. It strips your grand vision down to its core, focusing on a single fundamental aspect. For instance, if you dream of designing an expansive, space-themed game featuring intricate ship-to-ship combat, your MVP might just be the core dice-rolling combat mechanism. Similarly, for a Euro-style farming game, it could be the basic resource collection system. Basically, break the game down into smaller parts and systems, and then focus on those one at a time as you slowly bring the whole thing together. It can sometimes feel a bit tedious, but it makes the design process much more manageable. 2. The power of starting small. Starting with an MVP approach has several advantages. Simplicity of focus. Concentrating on a single aspect of your game reduces complexity and helps maintain your focus. Early fun testing. It enables you to assess the fun factor of your concept early in the development process, saving you time and effort in the long run. Building momentum. Completing a small manageable part of your game can give you a sense of achievement and the motivation to tackle the next component. Easy to pivot. It makes it easier to try different mechanisms to see which ones fit best and to find out if this is actually a game you want to pursue to completion. 3. Designing in modules. I use and recommend a modular approach to game design that breaks the game down into distinct systems or modules. Start perhaps with the movement system, followed by the combat mechanics, and then the resource management mechanism. This method allows you to playtest and refine each element individually before integrating them into a cohesive whole. Each one has to stand on its own and be fun before it gets combined with the other systems, and each one gets the focus it deserves. It also frees me up to experiment and try out different mechanisms to see which ones fit the theme and overall experience best. Should the game have a rondel for its action selection? Let's try it real quick. Maybe an element of area control needs to be involved with how workers are placed. Draw it on some note cards and see what happens. It's like building with Lego. You can switch out any blocks you want and piece things together as you see fit. And if you build something that later doesn't quite work, just leave it put together to possibly use in a future game. After years of doing this, I have a ton of systems that I really like that ended up being cut out of a game for various reasons. However, this means I also have a library of systems that can be integrated into future games. And that's been one of the main reasons my design process has sped up over the years. Nothing is ever wasted. 4. Iterative process and small victories. Designing a game is an iterative process, and your primary goal in the early stages should be creation rather than perfection. Small victories in developing individual modules can provide a significant boost, propelling you forward in your design journey. I find that designing this way is a lot easier to manage, as I don't feel overwhelmed by the work involved. I'm not trying to design a game. I'm simply figuring out how one small aspect of the game needs to work, and that's a lot easier to wrap my mind around, prototype, and playtest. Then each completed module gets me one step closer to realizing my overall vision. But never underestimate the power of a little momentum. One small victory can be the tipping point you need to ultimately bring a game to life. Perfection is procrastination masquerading as quality control. Chris Williamson. 5. Transitioning to playtesting. One of the fundamental truths in board game design is that you cannot playtest an idea. You need a tangible, playable version of your game, however rudimentary. This is where your MVP comes into play. It allows you to get something physical on the table, something you can actually interact with and test. This step is crucial in determining whether your game concept has the potential to captivate and engage players. A lot of my games start off as a few dice, some bits of paper, and a note card. Just anything that I can move around on a table to get a sense of how the game could work. And if I can make something fun and interesting out of those simple components, I know I can scale it up. Conclusion. Adopting the MVP philosophy in your design process is about embracing simplicity and taking pragmatic steps. It's about breaking down your grand vision into manageable, testable pieces that gradually come together to form a more complex whole. Whether you're a seasoned designer or just starting out, the MVP approach can streamline your design process, keep you focused, and provide much-needed clarity and direction. Remember, the goal is not to create the perfect game right out of the gate, but to develop a functional prototype that you can refine and improve upon. So take that big idea, distill it down to its essence, and start the exciting journey of bringing your game to life one piece at a time. Chapter 8. Overcoming Designer's Block. Strategies to get unstuck. Every game designer at some point encounters the dreaded designer's block. It's an all-too-common part of the creative process, often striking when you least expect it. You might be progressing well with your design when suddenly you hit a wall. An obstacle appears that seems insurmountable. But fear not, there are several strategies to help you navigate through these challenging moments. 1. Accepting the inevitable. Firstly, it's important to recognize that designer's block is normal. Many of the best games we know today faced similar roadblocks during their development, and understanding that this is a typical part of the process can alleviate some of the frustration. Designing games is hard, and when you run into problems you don't know how to solve, that's just what hard feels like. Unfortunately, a lot of people hit low points in their design journey and assume creating games isn't for them. However, it's really just part of the price of admission that everyone has to pay, no matter who they are. Accepting this and knowing deep down that every problem is figure-outable, with enough time, effort, and question asking, helped me to stick with game design in spite of the roadblocks I ran into. Some games took years to bring to life. Some games require me to find a co-designer or developer, and some games are still on the shelf of not quite sure what to do next. But after doing this for over 15 years, I know beyond all doubt that every hole can be climbed out of, and I firmly believe the same is true for you. 2. Taking a break. When you find yourself stuck, one of the most effective strategies is to take a step back, allowing your brain some time to rest and recharge. During this period, do the following. A. Play other games. Engaging with other games can be incredibly insightful. Observing how different designers tackle similar problems can often spark the solution you need or give you an idea on a totally different approach. Alternatively, if you're not able to play as many other games as you like, you can also absorb game-related media. Read design diaries, watch review videos and playthroughs, listen to podcasts. Anything that might offer insight into how other designers think and overcome their own challenges. B. Shift your focus. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem in one project is to divert your attention to another. Working on a different game can provide a fresh perspective and inadvertently lead to a breakthrough in your original design. I typically have 3 main designs going at one time, and then a few more secondary ideas that I'm just playing around with. Being able to jump back and forth between projects keeps my mind fresh and my creative juices flowing. This doesn't work for everyone, and some people really need to focus on only one game at a time, but it's definitely a strategy worth trying. 3. Embrace the learning curve. Recognize that sometimes the issue might stem from a gap in your current design skills. Game design, like any art form, requires time, practice, and patience to master. It's common to be able to identify what makes a great game long before you have the skills to create one yourself. This is especially true when you're just starting out. You simply don't have the experience, tool set, or frame of reference necessary to overcome a lot of design problems you run into. But why would you? When someone starts to learn a sport, you don't throw them into a game situation and expect success. Instead, you start with the basics, the general rules and basic skills, and then slowly move toward playing at full speed in an actual game. When you're getting started in game design, expecting to be able to create a fully complete and fun experience is like putting a child in an adult league basketball game and expecting things to go well. So cut yourself some slack. Anything worth doing takes time to learn how to do well, and creative fields like game design take a lifetime to master. But if you commit to the process of learning and growing, over time you'll surprise yourself in how much you start to understand the nuances of theme, mechanisms, player experience, and everything else involved in the craft. Conclusion. Designer's block is an inevitable part of the game design journey. But with the right approach, it can be overcome. Whether it's taking a break to play other games, shifting focus to a different project, or simply acknowledging your current skill level and persisting despite the challenges, there are ways to move forward. Embrace each block as an opportunity to grow. And remember that persistence is a key ingredient in the recipe for success in game design. The journey to becoming a great designer is paved with projects that never see the light of day. But remember, most people don't achieve greatness in their field overnight. It's the result of relentless perseverance, numerous failed attempts, and the courage to continue despite setbacks. So when faced with designer's block, keep pushing forward. The greatest writers, artists, designers, etc. only got to that point because they created a bunch of art that ended up in the trash, and they kept going. So I encourage you to do the same. Keep designing, keep learning, and above all, keep playing. Chapter 9. Crafting the Perfect Name. A Guide to Naming Your Game. The name of your game is more than just a label. It's the first impression and a vital marketing tool. A well-chosen name can intrigue, entice, and inform potential players. For both new designers and seasoned vets, naming a game can be a daunting task, but it's an important part of the design process. So this chapter provides some ideas on how to name your game effectively. 1. Reflect the theme. One option is for the title to reflect the game's theme. It should give players a hint of what to expect when they open the box. If your game is about building empires in ancient times, the name should evoke that era and activity. A name that aligns well with the game's content can create intrigue and set the right expectations. Games like Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective, Pandemic, Terraforming Mars, and Great Western Trail tell you exactly what the theme is in the title. And when that gets coupled with the thematic artwork, players know exactly what they're getting into before they even open the box. 2. Reflect the core mechanism. A similar option is to put a nod to the game's core mechanism in either the main title or subtitle. This could be a great way to clarify what type of game it is and make sure you're appealing to the intended audience. Many games also include stylized components in the box art to reinforce this. For example, Roll for the Galaxy has Roll in the title and several sci-fi themed dice on the cover to suggest you're going to be rolling lots of dice. Arkham Horror, the card game, and Star Wars X-Wing miniatures game use their subtitles to clarify what kinds of games they are, and Flick 'em Up's title lets you know it's a dexterity game based on flicking. 3. Keep it short and memorable. A good game name is usually short and memorable. Long or complex names can be difficult to remember or pronounce, which might put potential players off. Aim for brevity and impact. A concise name is also easier to brand and promote. Even a short, made-up word can work really well. Take Catan, for example. Other examples include Arc Nova, Azul, Seven Wonders, Nemesis, and Scythe. 4. Consider uniqueness and originality. Check that your game's name isn't already in use. A unique name helps your game stand out in a crowded market and avoids confusion. Additionally, avoid names that are too generic, as they can get lost among similar titles. Originality can also make your game more searchable online, on retail sites, and Board Game Geek. For example, Wingspan is a game about birds, but the creator chose to use a rarely used term related to birds instead of calling it something more obvious like birdwatching. 5. Test for clarity and pronunciation. Your game's name should be easy to pronounce and understand. Avoid words that might be confusing or hard to spell. Test the name with friends, family, or gaming groups to ensure it's clear and easy to communicate. This also applies to terms inside the game. When people can't pronounce an alien faction in a sci-fi game, they just call it the purple one, which doesn't help with immersion. 6. Think about cultural sensitivity. Be mindful of cultural sensitivities when naming your game. Avoid names that could be offensive or inappropriate in different cultures. A name that is respectful and inclusive can broaden your game's appeal to a global audience. Also, be aware that words can mean completely different things in other countries or regions. I once suggested a town in a game should be called Slagborough. The game had a robot and metal theme. The artist I was talking to burst out laughing and let me know that in the United Kingdom, where he was from, slag had a bit different definition than the one I was used to in Alabama. 7. Check for trademarks and domain availability. Before finalizing your game's name, check for existing trademarks to avoid legal issues. Also consider the availability of relevant domain names for your game's website. A matching domain name can be an asset for online marketing and branding. The easiest thing to do is search for the title in Board Game Geek's database and see if anything pops up. 8. Evoke emotions or curiosity. A great game name can evoke emotions or spark curiosity, and names that create intrigue or an emotional response can really draw players in. Think about the feelings you want to evoke: excitement, mystery, adventure, joy, and see how your name can reflect these. A few examples are So You've Been Eaten, Final Girl, Mansions of Madness, and Flashpoint Fire Rescue. 9. Play with words. Don't be afraid to get creative by playing with words, using puns, or creating new words. A clever play on words can make your game's name stand out and be memorable. However, ensure the wordplay aligns with your game's theme and is easy to understand. Some good examples are Dead of Winter, This Town Ain't Big Enough for the 2 to 4 of Us, Role Player, and Broom Service. 10. Flexibility for future expansion. If you plan to create expansions for your game, consider a name that allows for flexibility. A name that lends itself to thematic variations can be beneficial for branding future expansions. The game Russian Railroads is about constructing railroads in Russia. That worked pretty well until they decided to create an expansion set in Germany. It's called Russian Railroads, German Railroads, which sounds kind of silly. 11. When in doubt, just name it a location. One of the most popular game name conventions is to simply use the main location as the title. This applies to both real-life places and ones that are completely made up. This method isn't quite as creative as others, but it definitely works. Carcassonne, On Mars, Puerto Rico, Everdell, Gloomhaven, and Earth are good examples. Conclusion. Naming your game is a creative and strategic process. The right name can capture the essence of your game, attract players, and help with marketing. So take your time to brainstorm, test, and refine your game's title. Remember, a well-chosen name not only labels your game, but also becomes a key part of its identity and success. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? In game design, there's way too much talk about iteration and test groups and metrics and objectivity, and not nearly enough about love. If you truly love a game and you share it with others, and they love it too, there's a decent chance a wider audience will also. Alf Siegert. Chapter 10. Designing Games for Everyone. The Importance of Accessibility. Board games are more than just entertainment. They're a way for people to connect, learn, and engage with each other in a shared space of fun and challenge. However, not all games are accessible to everyone, which can exclude potential players due to physical, sensory, or cognitive barriers. Designing with accessibility in mind is not just an act of inclusivity. It's an essential approach to embracing the diverse community of players around the world and getting the game on as many tables as possible. 1. The need for accessibility in board games. In this context, accessibility refers to the ability of the game to be played by people with various disabilities, including visual impairments, color blindness, hearing impairments, physical disabilities, and cognitive impairments. Many board games feature small text, color-coded pieces that are indistinguishable for colorblind players, or complex rules that can be daunting for players with cognitive challenges. By addressing these issues, you can create games that are more inclusive and more marketable. 2. Benefits of accessible design. Broader audience reach. Accessible games can reach a larger audience. This inclusivity can lead to higher sales and a more robust gaming community. Enhanced gameplay experience. Games designed with accessibility in mind often result in a better experience for all players. Simplified and clear rules, high-contrast game pieces, and versatile gameplay options can improve the game for everyone, not just those with specific needs. Social inclusion. Board games are a social activity, and making them accessible means more people can participate in the fun. This inclusion fosters community and brings diverse groups of people together. 3. Creating accessible game experiences. Some key areas of accessibility include visual accessibility. Implement high-contrast colors, legible fonts, and avoid reliance on color as the sole game element. Good examples are games like Quirkle and Fantastic Factories that are double-coded to provide extra levels of information beyond color to differentiate game components. Games that provide dual-layered boards can also be helpful to know exactly where to place game pieces. Auditory accessibility. For audio-dependent games, provide alternatives like visual or tactile options. Visually focused games such as The Mind enhance accessibility as they don't rely on sound. Physical accessibility. Design components that are easy to manipulate, like larger cards or titles, to accommodate those with motor skill challenges. Cooperative games like Pandemic that encourage group participation can be more inclusive for players with physical disabilities. Cognitive accessibility. Simplify rules or offer rule variations for different cognitive abilities. Games with straightforward objectives like Ticket to Ride can be more inclusive. 4. Practical steps for designing accessible board games. Consult accessibility guidelines. Utilize resources like the Colorblind Awareness Organization and Meeple Like Us to understand common issues and solutions. You can also upload images to online simulators like Cobbless to test your cards, boards, etc. for colorblindness accessibility. Involve testers with disabilities. During the development process, include testers who have disabilities to provide feedback on the game's accessibility. Their first-hand experience is inevitable in identifying obstacles that might not be evident to someone without those disabilities. Use symbols and textures. Incorporate symbols or patterns along with colors and, if possible, use different textures, shapes, or sizes for game pieces to help players distinguish them by touch. Consider font size and contrast. Ensure that all text is legible, with a suitable font size and high contrast against the background to help both the visually impaired and those playing in low-light situations. Simplify and clarify rules. Write rules that are easy to understand and remember. Include player aids or quick reference cards for core rules, and make sure to have enough for each person at the table. Also, in your rulebook, include lots of examples and possibly a glossary of terms. Conclusion. Designing with accessibility in mind allows you to not only foster inclusivity, but also innovate in game design. Ultimately, the goal is to ensure that everyone can participate in the joy of gaming, making each game a richer, more inclusive experience. It's obviously not possible to make every game accessible to everyone. However, identifying often easy-to-fix accessibility issues and designing with intentionality can help you get your games on more tables. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Playtest, listen, adjust, and repeat. Do this until the majority of playtesters who enjoy the particular emotions your game evokes confirm feeling the emotions you're seeking to create. Rachel Bruner. Chapter 10. Solo Designing versus Co-Designing. For new game designers, one of the earliest decisions to make is whether to embark on the design journey alone or with a co-designer. And both approaches have unique advantages and challenges. Understanding the dynamics of solo and co-designing can help you choose the path that best aligns with your personal preferences, working style, and overall goals. Solo designing. Designing a game on your own allows for complete creative control. You make all decisions regarding the game's theme, mechanisms, rules, and experience. However, working alone also means all the weight of a project falls on you, which can lead to overwhelm, procrastination, and missed opportunities. Pros of solo designing. Complete creative control. You have the freedom to realize your vision without compromises or needing consensus. Simpler logistics. Coordinating schedules and meetings is not a concern. You can work at your own pace and on your own schedule. Direct communication. When presenting your game to publishers or playtesters, the communication is straightforward as you are the sole representative of your game. More royalties. If you're the only designer signing a licensing contract, you obviously make more money than if you have to split the royalties with a co-designer. Cons of solo designing. Limited perspective. Working alone means you rely solely on your own ideas and insights, which can sometimes limit the game's creative scope. Also, without external input, there's a risk of not noticing flaws or areas of improvement in your game. Greater responsibility. All tasks from initial concept to playtesting, iterating, and pitching to publishers fall on you, which can be overwhelming. Less accountability. When working alone, there's less pressure to get things done, which can lead to procrastination and lack of focus. Working with someone else can be a great motivator to hit deadlines and make steady progress so you don't let the other person down. Co-designing. Collaborating with a co-designer brings together diverse skills and perspectives and allows for shared responsibilities, more creative ideas, and a team that can be much greater than the sum of its parts. However, anytime more people are added to a project, the potential for conflict increases substantially, and you'll have to balance your working relationship with your personal vision for the game. Pros of co-designing. Diverse skills and perspectives. Different viewpoints can enhance the game's creativity and possibilities as each designer brings unique strengths to the table. Shared workload. Responsibilities such as playtesting, rulebook writing, and pitching to publishers can be divided, reducing the burden on a single individual. Support and motivation. Working with someone else provides moral support and motivation, especially during challenging phases of the design process. Cons of co-designing. Need for compromise. Differences in vision and ideas will require compromises, which might not always align with your original vision. Logistical challenges. Coordinating schedules and managing consistent communication can be challenging, especially if you don't live close to each other. Potential for conflicts. Differences in opinion and working styles can lead to conflicts which may affect the game development process and the quality of the final product. Less royalties. Sharing the workload also means splitting the royalties from licensing deals. Start with a contract. Designing games with a close friend might be a ton of fun, but it's also a business relationship. So if you're going to work with a co-designer, make sure you have a contract in place that clarifies and specifies what each person's responsibilities will be and what happens in the wake of certain unfortunate events. Here are some specific things to work out and put in the contract. What is each person's role in the project? For example, who is in charge of playtesting, prototype creation, reaching out to publishers, etc. Even if everyone takes part in a task, it's good to have one specific person in charge of it to make sure it gets done. What's the process for leaving the project? If someone wants to abandon the project, or if something tragic happens, you need a process that outlines how a designer can be removed from the partnership. Who gets final say? Sometimes a disagreement doesn't have a viable compromise. When that's the case, who gets to make the final decision? A different person could be the decision maker for different aspects of the game. Who pays for what? Are all costs split 50-50? Prototyping materials are usually fairly cheap, but what about airfare, hotel rooms, and convention badges? What if one designer really wants to buy a laser cutter or 3D printer? Some simple language in the contract can make it clear and leaves less room for disagreement and frustration. How will workload and royalties be split? 50-50 seems like an obvious choice, but is that really the case? Make sure to have a conversation about all the work involved and make sure you're on the same page about who does what. If you started the project alone but are now bringing on a co-designer, it might make more sense to do 60-40, or a split that better reflects each designer's contributions to the game. Working with a co-designer can be incredibly rewarding and help you get more done in less time. However, disagreements can quickly send a project off the rails, so it's best to have a simple contract and a list of agreed-upon expectations to prevent conflicts and keep everyone focused on the main goal, creating a fun game. Conclusion. Deciding between solo and co-designing depends largely on your personal working style, the complexity of your game, and your ability to either work independently or collaborate effectively. Solo designing offers full creative control, but can be isolating, whereas co-designing brings diverse insights and shared responsibilities, but requires compromise and coordination. Whichever path you choose, being aware of the pros and cons will help you navigate the process more effectively and make informed decisions that best suit your game design journey. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? It's easy to get lost in your own design and love it. But when I start to compare my own design to the games in my collection, particularly the fun ones that I play all the time, I'll see that I'm just designing in a vacuum. Jason Tagmeyer. Section 3. Find the Fun. Chapter 1. Understanding Fun. The Heart of Game Design. When playtesting my own games and others, I often find myself saying, "There's a fun game in here somewhere." Usually that means certain parts of the experience are interesting and that I see the fun that the game is trying to create. However, that fun is still buried beneath things that need to be removed, replaced, or refined. Game design is often a long, drawn-out sifting process, as you try to get rid of all the unnecessary parts and leave the bits that create the true experience you're going for. And unfortunately, fun is very good at hiding. Sometimes it's underneath an idea that worked perfectly in your head, but bombed spectacularly in real life. Other times it's behind a mechanism you love that just isn't working with the theme you've chosen. And sometimes it's right there in front of you, hiding in plain sight, and right next to a shiny new bad idea you can't take your eyes off. Fun is elusive, and even the best game designers in the world have a hard time finding it. But it must be found if you want people to enjoy your game and play it more than once. So this section will explore what fun is, how to find and create it, and various ways it can be implemented in your games. Understanding fun, the heart of game design. At the core of every game is a simple yet profound objective: to be fun. But what exactly makes a game fun? This elusive quality is obviously subjective and varies from player to player, and even day to day. Yet, there are common elements that consistently contribute to a game's enjoyment. This chapter explores these elements to help you create games that captivate and engage players. In general, I think of games as fun engines. Players put time in and get fun out. And as designers, it's our job to maximize the ratio of time to fun. Now, there are lots of ways to approach this, but there are several overarching core concepts that you should be thinking about in order to find the fun. Throughout the rest of this section, we'll explore these concepts in greater detail. 1. Engaging mechanics. The mechanics of a game are how its individual mechanisms, rules, systems, and procedures all work together. Fun arises when these mechanics are engaging and provide a satisfying gameplay experience. This could mean creating an innovative mechanism that offers new challenges or using a tried-and-tested system that's refined for maximum enjoyment. The key is that players should feel actively involved in the game, with every action and decision feeling meaningful. 2. Meaningful choices. Speaking of which, the presence of meaningful choices in a game significantly contributes to its fun factor. These are decisions that have real consequences in the game, influencing the outcome in significant ways. When players feel that their choices matter, they become more invested in the game, leading to a more engaging experience. People want to feel like they're playing the game, not like the game is playing them. 3. Balanced challenge. A game should present a balanced level of challenge. Too easy and it becomes boring. Too hard and it becomes frustrating. The sweet spot lies in presenting players with challenges that are surmountable, yet require strategic thinking, skill, or sometimes a bit of luck. Games that manage to hit this balance often keep players coming back for more. 4. Social interaction. Many games are fun because they facilitate social interaction. Whether it's through teamwork, competition, negotiation, or just shared storytelling, games can create memorable social experiences. Designing mechanics that encourage interaction can make games more enjoyable and unique. 5. Theme and narrative. A compelling theme or narrative can immensely enhance a game's fun. When players feel immersed in a game's world, they connect more deeply with the gameplay. And a well-crafted theme or story can transform abstract mechanics into a compelling experience. 6. Surprise and variability. Elements of surprise and variability can keep a game fresh and exciting. This could be in the form of random events, a variety of game scenarios, or unpredictable actions of other players. Games that offer a different experience each time they are played often have high replay value. 7. Aesthetic appeal. Never underestimate the power of a game's aesthetic appeal. Beautiful artwork, high-quality components, and a visually appealing setup can greatly enhance the fun of a game. These elements can draw players into the game's world and enhance the overall experience. 8. Achievable goals and rewards. Games should have clear, achievable goals and a system of rewards that motivate players. The satisfaction of achieving a goal or earning a reward is a significant part of what makes a game enjoyable. In general, players want to feel powerful, wealthy, and/or clever, and the more your game can create those feelings, the more fun it will be. Conclusion. Creating fun is a multifaceted challenge that involves balancing mechanics, themes, choices, and aesthetics. As a designer, your task is to weave these elements together into a cohesive and enjoyable experience. At the heart of every great game is a simple promise, the promise of fun. And by focusing on what makes games enjoyable, you can create fun engines that players will love to put time into. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Understanding what you might find fun could be different than what other people find fun. If you can, see if your game can have multiple types of fun. J. Cormier. Chapter 13. Finding the Fun. How to identify and enhance the enjoyment in your game. Creating a board game is a journey filled with creativity, iteration, and discovery. At the heart of this process lies a fundamental question. Is the game fun? And finding the fun in your game is vital for its success and player enjoyment. But how do you identify what makes your game enjoyable? This chapter will explore specific ways to uncover and enhance the fun elements in your game. The Designer's Dilemma. It's extremely difficult to know if your own game is actually fun to play. It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. And fun is so subjective and varied, encompassing everything from strategic thinking and social interaction to storytelling and exploration, that you're never going to find it while your game is still in your head or on a notebook. You have to get it on a table in front of other people and start moving things around. Many times, the aspects you thought would be the most fun are actually the parts you need to get rid of first, and a random mechanism you threw in as a placeholder turns out to be the real juice that makes the game fun. But once your game hits the table, the key is to identify what kind of fun your game aims to deliver and focus on amplifying the elements that bring that fun to life. Ways to identify fun in your game. 1. Playtest by yourself. Why it's important. While external feedback is invaluable, solo playtesting allows you to gain a deeper understanding of your game's overall mechanics and identify potential issues before involving others. How to do it. Simulate different player perspectives and strategies by playing multiple roles. Take detailed notes on which aspects feel engaging and which feel lacking. This approach helps you refine the game's flow and create fun moments before introducing it to innocent victims, playtesters. 2. Playtest with different groups. Why it's important. Different players find different aspects of a game fun. Playtesting with a variety of groups helps you understand what works for a broader audience. How to do it. Organize playtest sessions with players of different ages, skill levels, and gaming preferences. Observe their reactions and gather feedback on what they enjoyed the most. 3. Identify moments of engagement. Why it's important. Moments when players are most engaged are often when they're having the most fun. How to do it. During playtesting, watch for moments when players are fully absorbed in the game. Note the actions, strategies, or scenarios that lead to heightened engagement. 4. Analyze player feedback. Why it's important. Direct feedback from players can provide insights into which aspects of the game they found most enjoyable. How to do it. Use open discussions and structured feedback forms to ask specific questions about what players liked, what they found challenging, and what they found dull. Look for common themes in their responses. 5. Focus on player emotions. Why it's important. Fun is often tied to emotional responses like excitement, tension, surprise, and satisfaction. How to do it. Pay attention to players' emotional reactions during the game. Are they laughing, celebrating victories, or intensely focused? These emotional highs can highlight the most fun parts of your game. Ways to enhance fun in your game. 1. Refine and highlight key mechanisms. Why it's important. The core mechanisms should be the most fun parts of the game and therefore should be emphasized and refined to ensure they stand out and are supported by every other aspect of the game. How to do it. Once you've identified the parts of the game that players enjoy the most, look for ways to simplify, streamline, and enhance them. Ensure these aspects are central to the gameplay experience and consider removing anything that doesn't point back to them. 2. Create meaningful choices. Why it's important. Players enjoy games where their decisions have significant and clear impacts. How to do it. Design your game to offer a variety of strategic options that lead to different outcomes. Ensure that each choice feels consequential and rewarding. 3. Encourage social interaction. Why it's important. Many players find social interaction to be one of the most enjoyable aspects of board games. How to do it. Incorporate elements that encourage player interaction such as trading, negotiating, and cooperative tasks. Ensure that these interactions are integral to players' success. 4. Balance challenge and reward. Why it's important. A game that is too easy or too hard can quickly become boring or frustrating. How to do it. Strive for a balance where players feel challenged but also have a fair chance of success. Provide clear and achievable goals with rewards that feel satisfying and motivating. Conclusion. Finding the fun in your design is the most important step towards creating a game that players will love and return to. By playtesting with different groups, focusing on moments of engagement, analyzing player feedback, and enhancing core mechanisms, you can identify and amplify the elements that make your game enjoyable. Remember, the goal is to create an experience that not only challenges players, but also brings them joy and satisfaction. Embrace the iterative process of testing and refining, and you'll be well on your way to designing a game that captures the hearts and minds of players. Note that I'll go deeper into the topic of playtesting in Section 5. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? For most hobby game designs, you as the game designer should set a goal for yourself to ensure that your design acts as a catalyst for your players to feel clever about their play and their choices. Do that, and the fun will follow. J.B. Howell. Chapter 14. Designing a series of interesting choices. Sid Meier once said, "A game is a series of interesting choices." Basically, a player having options is what makes an experience a game and not just an activity. And the more interesting these choices are, the more fun the game will be. So when you're designing a game, understanding the power of choice is paramount. A game's ability to engage players often hinges on how meaningful each decision feels during play. But what makes a choice meaningful? It's not just about the mechanics or the complexity. It's about impact. When players see that their actions have significant consequences, leading them closer to victory or defeat, the game transforms from a simple pastime to a compelling journey of strategy and consequence. The importance of meaningful choices in game design. Meaningful choices are the cornerstone of engaging games. They provide players with a sense of agency, the feeling that the game's outcome is directly influenced by their decision. This sense of agency is crucial because it makes the experience personal and immersive. Players aren't merely going through the motions. They're actively shaping their destiny within the game's world. Characteristics of meaningful choices. To identify meaningful choices in a game, look for these aspects. Impact. A meaningful choice must have a clear and perceivable impact on the game's outcome. This impact doesn't need to be immediate, but it should be present and recognizable. Visibility. Players should be able to understand how a choice affects the game. This requires clear communication of the game's rules and mechanics. Relevance. Choices should feel relevant to the game's objectives. Irrelevant decisions diminish the player's sense of influence over the game. Balance. Effective choices are those that provide a balanced set of options, each with its own set of risks and rewards. However, as I mentioned in the previous section, balance is more about feel than a specific algorithm. So pay more attention to player perception than a spreadsheet. Designing for meaningful choices. To design a game that is full of meaningful choices, follow these guidelines. 1. Clear objectives. Ensure that players understand what they're trying to achieve. Clear objectives set the stage for decisions that feel like they matter. 2. Interconnected decisions. Design choices that build upon one another, creating a layered experience where early decisions impact later opportunities. 3. Margin for error. If you hear playtesters say something to the effect of, "The game feels too tight," it means that they feel like the game is too punishing for missteps. If a poor choice in the first round plays a large role in losing the game an hour later, it will leave players feeling frustrated. Choices should matter, but make sure individual choices don't matter too much. 4. Diverse strategies. Offer multiple paths to victory to accommodate different playstyles and strategic approaches. This diversity encourages players to think critically and make choices that align with their preferred tactics. 5. Feedback loops. Provide feedback that helps players understand the consequences of their decisions. Whether through the game's narrative, scoring system, or visual cue, immediate feedback helps clarify the impact of a player's actions. Simple versus complex. Jenga is one of the simplest games ever made. However, each block's removal is a meaningful choice, fundamentally altering the structure's stability. The consequences of each decision are immediate and visible, making even the simple game engaging and fun. Contrast that with a complex strategy game like Terra Mystica. Here, players must manage multiple variables and long-term strategies. The choices involve selecting actions that will develop resources, expand territory, and achieve strategic goals over time. Each decision made in early rounds sets the stage for future opportunities, creating a deeply interconnected and impactful gameplay experience. Both paths work. It just depends on the experience you're trying to create. However, the best complex games are also the ones that keep things simple. Winning might consist of 50 turns of interconnected actions, but each turn typically only has a few choices to pick from, in the same way a turn of Jenga only has a few blocks that a player can remove. As your game becomes more complicated overall, you'll need to find ways to simplify its individual parts. For example, Twilight Imperium is a massive game that can take 8 hours to finish, but the game is broken down into several phases where the players make simple choices to move their overarching strategies forward. This works because complexity is diffused by clarity. Clear rules and objectives can make even the most complicated games easy for players to understand. And placing various aspects of the game in their own phases means players only have to think about a few things at one time. A game can be an absolute brain burner, but if it also limits the number of choices present to a player at once, it can prevent players from feeling overwhelmed or locked in analysis paralysis. Learning from loss. As people play your game, they should be able to think through various options and paths to take that they think will lead to winning the game. If they can't see clear options and just take their turns randomly, there's a disconnect between them and the game, which you'll need to find a way to fix. Sometimes it's because they don't understand the rules. Other times it's because they haven't fully grasped how the game's core mechanism works. But whatever the case may be, it's your job to make their choices and potential outcomes clear. When players lose, they should be able to look back over the choices they made throughout the game and realize what they could have done differently to have a better chance to win. When they think through how the game played out and can't understand why they lost and what could have been done differently, they assume the game's choices were arbitrary, which doesn't exactly get them excited to play again. Conclusion. Meaningful choices are at the heart of fun games. They transform routine play into an engaging narrative of cause and effect where every decision counts. As a game designer, understanding how to craft such choices means striking a balance between complexity and clarity, ensuring that each player's decision-making process is both challenging and easy to understand. By focusing on the impact, visibility, relevance, and balance of choices, you can create games that players will return to, eager to explore new strategies and outcomes. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Remove as many obstacles from playing as possible. Every time there's a rule or implied rule that says, "You can't do that," it saps a little bit of fun away. Ted Alspach. Chapter 15. The Choice Trident. Power, Wealth, and Cleverness. When designing a game, understanding what drives player enjoyment is crucial. The choice trident is a concept that encapsulates 3 core feelings that, according to human psychology, significantly contribute to player experience and fun. This chapter dives into how incorporating these elements can enhance the gaming experience, making your game more engaging and satisfying for players. 1. The allure of power, control, and influence. The first prong of the choice trident is power. Players often seek a sense of control and influence over the game's environment. This doesn't necessarily mean overpowering others. It can also manifest as control over one's own fate within the game. Designing game mechanics that allow players to feel they have a direct impact on the game's outcome, whether through strategic decision-making, resource control, or character development, taps into this desire for power. It's about giving players meaningful choices that have visible consequences in the game world. You can also help players feel powerful by offering ways to level up or improve over the course of the game. This could be through gaining access to better cards, unlocking abilities, opening up new areas to explore or control, etc. Any choice that gives the player a sense of progression as their character or faction or empire becomes more of a force to be reckoned with will go a long way in harnessing this part of the choice trident. In regular life, many people feel powerless in their situations and unable to control a lot of what happens. But in a game, those same people can be bulletproof superheroes, level 99 warriors, and world-conquering emperors. And for just a few minutes, they can feel like they have much more power to affect how their story plays out. 2. The gratification of wealth, accumulation and utilization. The second prong of the trident is wealth. This doesn't solely refer to monetary riches. It encompasses any form of resource accumulation and utilization. Players enjoy collecting, whether it's points, resources, cards, or any other in-game assets. The key is to make the accumulation of these resources feel rewarding and provide opportunities for their strategic use. The sense of building, growing, and efficiently managing resources can be deeply satisfying, and it offers players a tangible measure of their progress and success in the game. Even little things like making money, $1 million instead of $1, can help players feel like they're up next on MTV Cribs. One of my favorite examples is the money in Millennium Blades. In this game, players buy cards for a fictional collectible card game, but instead of having individual tokens or using single paper bills like Monopoly for currency, the game has stacks of paper money that are wrapped together to present different values. For example, a stack of 10 green bills is used for $1. So when you buy a card for $1, you toss a stack of cash instead of one cardboard chit, and it's amazing how something so simple can make a player feel so rich. Games with auctions, negotiations, open markets, or any other mechanism that allows players to accumulate resources and spend them can utilize this part of the choice trident and have players excited to play again. 3. The satisfaction of cleverness, strategy, and problem solving. The third prong is intelligence. Players love to feel smart. They enjoy puzzles, strategic planning, and the challenge of outthinking the game or other players. And games that challenge players to think, strategize, and solve problems can be incredibly engaging. This involves creating scenarios where players must make decisions with meaningful impact, where foresight and planning are rewarded. It's not about the complexity of the rules, but the depth of the choices players face. Giving players multiple paths to score points, defeat other players, create combos, etc., goes a long way in helping them feel clever as they try to outwit the other people at the table. Few things are more satisfying than a long-term plan coming together over the course of multiple turns and the slow realization of everyone else at the table as they figure out what's happening. It's a rush, and any choices you can add to your game that highlight this feeling will help you apply this part of the choice trident and make your game much more fun to play. Incorporating the trident into game design. To effectively incorporate the choice trident into your game design, consider the following. Incentivized behavior. Whatever experience you're going for, people will almost always do what they're incentivized to do. So if you want players to level up to feel powerful, buy and sell goods to feel wealthy, or piece together combos to feel clever, make sure those are the main things that help players win. Player agency. Regardless of the game's theme or mechanics, players should always feel that their actions matter. Ensure that the choices they make in pursuit of power, wealth, or cleverness significantly impact their experience and potential for success in the game. Feedback mechanisms. Provide clear feedback for players' actions related to these three aspects. Whether it's a visual cue for gaining resources, wealth, a strategic advantage gained, cleverness, or a significant alteration of the game's state, power, players should be able to see the results of their choices. Accessibility and depth. While catering to these three aspects, keep the game accessible to new players while providing enough depth for seasoned gamers. The game should be easy to learn, but offer a rich array of strategic possibilities. Multiple paths. Different players have different tastes and will be drawn towards different choices. Some players will choose the barbarian who does a lot of damage. Some would rather have the rogue who can steal money from enemies. And some want the wizard who has different spells for different situations. So having multiple options and potentially multiple paths to victory can make your game more appealing to a wider audience as you tap into the preferences of different player types. Conclusion. By understanding and integrating the choice trident, power, wealth, and cleverness into your game design, you can create a more engaging and satisfying experience for players. These elements tap into fundamental aspects of human psychology, and when balanced and well implemented, can significantly enhance the enjoyment and replayability of your game. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? If you find yourself designing a game, what is your goal? Is it that you want to have fun designing it? Is it that you want to make a game that is closer to your idea of fun than other games out there? Do you have a particular audience in mind and want to make a game that they find fun? Do you want to express yourself? Do you want people to say nice things about something you've created and get that sweet, sweet rush of endorphins? Do you want to make money? It's likely that you want a number of things. Colby Dauk. Chapter 16. The Role of Tension in Game Design, Enhancing Fun and Engagement. Tension in games refers to a sense of uncertainty, challenge, or anticipation that players experience during gameplay and significantly influences how enjoyable a game is. It's a driving force that keeps players engaged, invested, and emotionally involved in the game. This chapter explores why tension is essential in gameplay design and how it directly correlates to the fun and excitement players experience. Types of tension in games. Competitive tension arises from player interactions such as racing to achieve a goal, battling for resources, or outsmarting opponents. Narrative tension, created through storytelling elements where players are eager to see how the story unfolds. Mechanical tension stems from the game's mechanics, such as time limits, resource management challenges, or risk-reward decisions. Tension as a source of engagement. Tension captivates players' attention and keeps them engaged throughout the game. It arises from situations where players are invested in the outcome but uncertain about what will happen next. This uncertainty can stem from various sources: competition with other players, challenges posed by the game's core mechanism, or the unpredictability of game events. Limiting player actions or allowing players to actively affect each other can greatly enhance your game's tension. For example, in the worker placement phase of Dune, Imperium, you typically only have 2 agents, or workers, which limits your actions. However, most of the action spaces can only have 1 worker, which creates a ton of tension as you wait for your turn and hope other players don't take the spot you need. Lost Cities is another great example. In this 2-player game, you're constantly discarding cards that your opponent can pick up, and every card you lay down comes with a small amount of anxiety as you hope it's not the exact card your opponent has been waiting for. Balancing challenge and ability. A key aspect of creating tension is finding the right balance between the challenge a game presents and the player's ability to meet that challenge. If a game is too easy, it lacks tension and becomes boring. If it's too hard, it can become frustrating. The sweet spot is where the game's challenges are aligned with the player's abilities, creating a satisfying level of tension that is exciting but not overwhelming. When players don't understand how the game works, they won't experience its tension because they won't be able to see the possible cause and effect possibilities. They still might feel tension, but it'll be the tension that comes from trying not to look stupid in front of other people. To help players, a clear rulebook is vital, but you can also adjust the learning curve so that the game gradually increases in difficulty and complexity over time so players can understand key concepts before giving them more options. You can also limit the number of choices or options available to the players at one time to manage the game's cognitive load, the brain power it takes to play the game. Tension comes from being unsure about what's going to happen next, but if a player has to think through 20 different possibilities, they're more likely to feel burnout than tension. Tension through uncertainty and risk. Incorporating elements of uncertainty and risk can significantly enhance a game's tension. This could be through mechanisms like dice rolling, drawing cards from a shuffled deck, or making decisions with unpredictable outcomes. The key is to ensure that these elements are not purely based on luck, but allow for at least some strategic decision-making. As mentioned in the first chapter of this section, surprise is a powerful tool in a game designer's toolbox. When used effectively, tension and surprise work together to create memorable moments where a player takes a chance and either comes up big or fails miserably. The fun comes from the buildup of not knowing, and then the quick release of finding out. For example, in Kingdom Death Monster, combat often comes down to a final die roll, and players will either succeed and vanquish a monster, or they fail, and the monster will eat their faces off next turn. Combine that with the game's hit location deck, the possibility for critical wounds, and the potential for one-shot kills, and you get very tense and often surprising combat every single round. Managing tension and player emotions throughout the game. Tension should ebb and flow throughout the game, with moments of high tension followed by periods of relative calm. This pacing keeps players engaged and prevents the game from becoming too stressful or too dull. Tension directly impacts players' emotions, creating a sense of excitement, suspense, and thrill. And when players are emotionally invested in the outcome of the game, they're more engaged and typically find the game more enjoyable. The resolution of tension, such as achieving a goal or surviving a challenge, provides a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, and most people find that fun, which is why it's usually best to end the game on one of those highs. For example, in Pandemic, the game immediately ends when players find the fourth and final cure. This is a tense, exciting moment that took planning and teamwork to accomplish, and the players get to sit back and bask in victory. However, if the game didn't end when you got the fourth cure, but instead forced players to methodically move around the board, removing the rest of the disease cubes one by one, it would end on a rather dull moment of picking up a cube you had the cure for 5 turns ago. When telling a story, you want to start as close to the end as possible, and once the story hits its climax, you want to get to the end as quickly as you can. Game design works the same way, and ending right after a big, tense moment will leave players with that as their main memory. Playtesting and adjusting tension. Playtesting is crucial in assessing and adjusting the level of tension in your game. Observing players' reaction and gathering feedback can help you fine-tune elements that contribute to tension, ensuring that it enhances the game's fun and excitement. However, don't wait until the game is over to gather feedback about tension. Pausing at certain points throughout the game and asking how players are feeling and why can give you excellent insight into if the experience is achieving the build-up and release type of moments you're hoping for. Players tend to only remember the most recent swing of emotions, so if you wait until the end of the game to get feedback, you're going to miss out on key data. Conclusion. Tension is a powerful tool in game design, directly contributing to a game's fun and engagement. By carefully crafting and balancing sources of tension, you can create compelling gameplay experiences that captivate and thrill players. Just keep in mind that the goal is to strike the right balance, creating a game that is challenging, engaging, and most importantly, fun to play. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? Create something that you enjoy playing over and over again. Play a lot of games and find out what fun means for you. Then try to add that into your own designs. Shem Phillips. Chapter 17. The Goldilocks Rule. Fun that is just right. Every game you design is going to have a different approach to fun depending on the overall experience you're going for. However, game design in general is a consistent, complex balancing act where you're always trying to find the perfect harmony between too much and too little of each game element. Whether you're working on a 10-minute party game or a 3-hour Euro, you'll be seeking out the ideal sweet spot where every aspect of your game feels just right to players. I call this concept the Goldilocks rule, and my game design process got much faster, easier, and better when I started applying the rule to my games and how I gather feedback. And in this chapter, we'll explore how to apply the Goldilocks rule to your games. Understanding the Goldilocks rule. The Goldilocks rule emphasizes just right for every aspect of the game, ensuring that each part contributes positively to the overall experience. Whether it's the complexity of rules, game length, player interaction, or the balance between luck and skill, every element should feel optimal and enhance player engagement. Key elements to get just right. 1. Game length. A game that ends too quickly can leave players unsatisfied. Prolonged gameplay can lead to boredom and disengagement. Find a duration that keeps players engaged from start to finish. Here's a tip. Time your playtest and gather feedback on game length to adjust pacing and ensure a satisfying experience. 2. Downtime. If players don't have enough time to think, the game can feel rushed. Excessive downtime can make the game feel boring and sluggish. Maintain a balance where players are engaged but have enough time to make thoughtful decisions. Here's a tip. Monitor player engagement during turns and streamline gameplay to reduce unnecessary waiting times. 3. Interaction. Isolated gameplay can make players feel disconnected from each other. Overbearing interactions can lead to chaos and frustration. Ensure meaningful interactions that enhances the social aspect of the game without causing chaos, unless chaos is the experience you're hoping for. Here's a tip. Incorporate mechanics that encourage strategic interaction and collaboration without overwhelming players with too many choices. 4. Theme. A weak theme can make the game feel abstract and uninspiring. An overly dominant theme can overshadow gameplay mechanics and become more of a simulation than a game. The theme should immerse players in the game without detracting from the gameplay. Here's a tip. Integrate thematic elements with mechanics to make the game more intuitive and to create an immersive yet clear and enjoyable experience. 5. Choices. Limited choices can make the game feel monotonous and unchallenging, or like the game is playing itself. An overabundance of choices can be overwhelming and confusing. The correct range of meaningful choices allows players to feel in control and like their decisions matter without leading to analysis paralysis. Here's a tip. Offer choices that impact the game's outcome, encouraging strategic thinking and planning, but limit the number of choices available on a single turn. Often 2 to 3 options is plenty. 6. Luck versus skill. Games driven by too much luck can feel unpredictable and unfair. Games that rely solely on skill can be intimidating for casual players and feel solved for experienced players. Balance elements of luck and skill to cater to both strategic and casual players. Enough luck so that the game has surprises, but enough skill so that players feel like they're playing the game more than the game is playing them. Here's a tip. Use a mix of random elements and strategic decisions to make the game more dynamic and to appeal to a broad audience. 7. Rules. Missing and/or unclear information can lead to confusion and frustration. Overwhelming players with overly detailed or complex rules can detract from the enjoyment and make the game appear more complicated than it really is. Aim for clarity and brevity. rules should be easy to learn and clearly explained. Here's a tip. Simplify your rulebook and use visual aids like diagrams or quick reference guides to enhance understanding. Gathering and implementing feedback. During playtesting, you can use the Goldilocks rule as a guide as you watch players engage with your game and gather feedback from them throughout the experience and after the game is over. If you'd like to use the feedback form I use, which utilizes the Goldilocks rule, you can download it at www.boardgamedesignlab.com/playtest-feedback-form. After gathering feedback, analyze the data to identify patterns and areas for improvement. Adjust your game to better align with the Goldilocks rule and continue testing until you achieve the desired balance. This iterative process is essential for refining your game and ensuring it provides an enjoyable experience for all players. Conclusion. Every game is going to have a different just right, and it really comes down to the experience you're trying to create. Some games last 2 hours, and it feels too short. Other games last 10 minutes, and it feels too long. Some games rely mostly on luck by design. Other games take years to master. But ultimately, it's all about the player experience and what's going to create the most fun at the table. Applying the Goldilocks rule in your design and playtesting process will help you find the right balance in every aspect of your game. And by focusing on finding the sweet spot for each of your game's key elements, you can create a game that is both enjoyable and replayable and ensure players think it was just right. Chapter 18. The Power of Incentives. Motivating players to engage and enjoy. In the 1700s, 33% of British criminals being transported to Australia died en route. Initially, sea captains were paid for every passenger who boarded the ship. However, when Britain switched to paying captains for every passenger who walked off the ship in Australia, the survival rate skyrocketed to 99%. It's amazing how shifting incentives can lead to significantly different outcomes. And just as incentives influence behavior in real life, they guide players' actions, decisions, and engagement in board games, and by understanding and implementing effective incentives, you can create more engaging, enjoyable, and fun experiences. So this chapter will explore the importance of incentives in game design and provide practical ways to incentivize players. The importance of incentives. Incentives in board games serve as the psychological backbone that guides players' behavior and decision-making. They are the reasons players chose one strategy over another and feel invested in the gameplay. Extrinsic, such as victory points, rewards, or game assets which players earn through specific actions, or intrinsic, where the motivation comes from the joy of playing, strategizing, or the social interaction within the game itself. Incentives are essentially rewards or motivators that encourage players to take specific actions. When used effectively, they can do the following. Drive player engagement. Effective incentives keep players interested and engaged throughout the game. They provide goals and challenges that players strive to achieve or overcome. Encourage strategic depth. By offering multiple pathways to win and different strategies to explore, incentives encourage deeper thinking and planning, enhancing the game's strategic nature. Enhance reliability. Well-designed and varied incentives ensure that each game session feels different, encouraging players to explore new strategies and increasing the game's replay value. Applying incentives in game design. Here are several ways to incorporate effective incentives into your games. 1. Victory points. Concept. Award points for achieving specific objectives or milestones. Implementation. In games like Catan, players earn points for building settlements, cities, and achieving certain goals. This incentivizes players to pursue these objectives throughout the game. 2. Resource management. Concept. Provide rewards for efficient resource management. Implementation. In terraforming Mars, players gain resources that can be used to build projects, incentivizing careful planning and management of their assets. 3. Achievements and milestones. Concept. Offer rewards for reaching certain milestones or achievements. Implementation. In Gloomhaven, players receive new abilities by leveling up and new characters by completing quests, motivating them to work towards these goals. 4. Risk versus reward. Concept. Design choices that involve weighing potential risks against rewards. Implementation. In Dead of Winter, when players are searching for items, they must decide whether to keep searching for higher rewards at the risk of attracting zombies or be satisfied with what they already found. 5. Variable player powers. Concept. Give players unique abilities or advantages. Implementation. In Root, each faction has distinct abilities and goals, incentivizing players to leverage their unique strengths to win. 6. In-game currency. Concept. Use in-game currency as an incentive for various actions. Implementation. In Monopoly, players earn money by acquiring properties and charging rent, driving the core gameplay loop. 7. Hidden goals. Concept. Provide secret objectives that players work towards. Implementation. In Scythe, players have personal objectives that offer additional points if completed, adding a layer of strategy and surprise. 8. Feedback loops. Concept. Create systems where actions lead to immediate and noticeable feedback. Implementation. In Ticket to Ride, players immediately see the impact of completing a route on their score and board position, reinforcing their actions. 9. Narrative progression. Concept. Give players a story to progress through to see how it ends. Implementation. In time stories, players become protagonists in the story, making choices that reveal new plot elements and outcomes. More things to think about. Balance is key. A fun game must balance its incentives to avoid dominant strategies that make the game predictable. Balancing incentives involves ensuring that no single strategy is overwhelmingly better than others, providing players with a variety of viable options to explore. Align incentives with the theme. Incentives should feel organic and integral to the game's theme. For example, in a game set in medieval times, incentives might include gaining land, building castles, or accumulating wealth, which all align with the historical context. Gradual complexity. Introduce simple incentives early in the game and more complex ones as the game progresses. This approach helps new players learn the game without feeling overwhelmed while providing depth for experienced players. Diversify incentives for different player types. Recognize that different players enjoy different types of incentives. Some may prefer competitive challenges, while others might enjoy cooperative elements or simply want to explore the game's narrative. And most importantly, fun equals winning. The things that make your game fun to play should also be the things that help players win. If a boring strategy gets the most victory points, players will be incentivized to do it, but they won't have much fun along the way. For example, in Ghost Stories, you win when the final boss is defeated, which takes careful planning, collaboration, and mitigating bad die rolls as much as possible. Those are also the things that make the game fun. And when having fun leads to winning, people have a tendency to want to play again. It also means that even when players lose, they had fun along the way and want to play again. Conclusion. Incentives are not just rewards. They are the guiding forces that make a board game intriguing, challenging, and fun. They are crucial for directing gameplay, enhancing player interaction, and ensuring that every game session provides a unique and memorable experience. As a game designer, understanding and skillfully implementing incentives is essential to creating games that captivate and engage a diverse audience of players. Through thoughtful design and careful balancing, incentives can transform a simple concept into a beloved game on any shelf. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? I've had great ideas while working on a game, but scrapped them or written them down for future use because they didn't fit what my target audience would enjoy. Are you designing for gamers? Is this a family game? Are you aiming for mass market? Those are potentially very different types of games. with audiences that find different things fun. Know what your end goal is, research that market, and design with that in mind. Kane Klinko. Chapter 19. Unlocking Engagement. Applying Nicole Lazzaro's 4 keys to fun in board game design. Creating a game that captivates players, keeping them engaged from start to finish, is a challenging yet rewarding endeavor, and Nicole Lazzaro's framework, the 4 keys to fun, provides invaluable insights that can be directly applied to board game design. These keys, hard fun, easy fun, serious fun, and people fun, offer a holistic approach to crafting experiences that resonate with different players' preferences. I encourage you to dive into Nicole's entire framework when you have a chance, but here's a summary of how it can be applied to the game design process. 1. Hard fun. Challenging yet satisfying. Hard fun is at the heart of many classic and strategy-heavy board games. This type of fun stems from the challenge, strategy, and problem-solving aspects that demand player involvement. To implement hard fun in games, incorporate strategic depth. Design mechanics that allow players to make meaningful choices. For instance, in games like chess or terraforming Mars, each decision impacts the game's outcome, rewarding strategic planning and tactical adjustments. Offer graduated challenges. To keep the game accessible yet challenging, structure gameplay to increase its complexity. This can be achieved through progressive leveling or scenarios that introduce new challenges as the game advances. Give feedback and rewards. Provide clear feedback for player actions, particularly when overcoming challenges or achieving significant milestones within the game. Rewards can be intrinsic, like gaining personal satisfaction for pulling off a ridiculous combo, or extrinsic, such as earning victory points or piles of money. 2. Easy fun. Curiosity and exploration. Easy fun is about immersing players in an experience that arouses curiosity through exploration, role-playing, or narrative. This key focuses on the sensory and imaginative aspects of fun and can be implemented in these ways. Rich storytelling. Create a compelling narrative that pulls players into the game's world. Games like Tales of the Arabian Nights excel by allowing players to explore stories and make choices that influence the narrative's direction. Aesthetic appeal. Invest in high-quality thematic art and design elements that enhance the visual and tactical experience of the game. The artwork in games like Tokaido not only serves a functional purpose, but also helps to create a vivid, immersive world. Open-ended exploration. Design elements of the game that encourage players to explore different strategies or outcomes without punishing them for experimentation. This could be through modular boards, random event cards, or multiple paths to victory. For example, in Everdell, players can choose from various strategies to build their woodland city, focusing on constructing buildings, recruiting critters, or gathering resources. The game's open-ended nature and numerous paths to victory encourage players to experiment with different approaches, fostering a sense of discovery and creativity. 3. Serious fun. Real-world benefits. Serious fun ties the enjoyment of gameplay to real-world outcomes, values, or learning. This key is particularly powerful in educational or lifestyle games, but can be subtly integrated into any board game in the following ways. Educational value. Design games that teach or inform. For instance, Ticket to Ride subtly educates players about geography and strategic route planning while engaging them in competitive gameplay. Players learn about various cities and countries as they build train routes across a map, enhancing their geographical knowledge and planning skills through a fun and casual experience. Themes with real-world connections. Utilize themes that reflect real-world activities, conflicts, or scenarios, which can lead to greater player empathy and understanding, as seen in games like This War of Mine. Reward cooperation and reflection. Encourage players to reflect on their actions and their consequences, potentially rewarding cooperation or decisions that align with real-world values or ethical considerations. For instance, in Hanabi, players must work together to create the best possible fireworks display by playing cards in the correct sequence. However, players cannot see their own cards, so they must rely on cooperation and communication. This cooperative gameplay not only fosters teamwork and strategic thinking, but also encourages players to consider the impact of their actions on the group's success. 4. People fun. Social interaction. People fun focuses on the social interactions that games facilitate. This is where multiplayer games shine, by creating a framework for players to interact, compete, and cooperate, and you can create this type of fun in the following ways. Foster interaction. Design mechanics that require player interaction such as trading, negotiating, or teamwork. Games like Catan and Sherlock Holmes, Consulting Detective thrive on player interactions that lead to interesting and fun social engagements. Include roles and characters. Allow players to assume roles or characters with unique abilities and perspectives, enhancing the social and role-playing elements of the game. Sheriff of Nottingham does this well, with players bluffing and negotiating their way to victory. Add social deduction elements. Incorporate elements of social deduction to encourage discussion, deceit, and detection, which can lead to lively group dynamics and memorable gameplay experiences, as seen in games like Werewolf and Murder in Hong Kong. Conclusion. By understanding and applying these 4 keys to fun, you can create more engaging and enjoyable games and appeal to a variety of players. Each key opens different doors for creativity and player engagement, making your game not just a product, but an experience that stands out in the crowded board game market. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? A key thing is just to value fun over things. You can only maximize one variable. Which game is more fun? The most fun game or the best balanced game? It could be a tie. Otherwise, the more fun game is more fun. Donald X. Vaccarino. Chapter 20. Harnessing the 8 kinds of fun in board game design. Understanding the various ways people find enjoyment in games can dramatically enhance how you approach game creation. I recently found a framework called the 8 Kinds of Fun by video game designer Marc LeBlanc. And even though it was created based on digital games, it still provides a comprehensive lens through which to view and design board games. So this chapter explores how each type of fun can be effectively integrated into board game design to create engaging and memorable experiences. 1. Sensation. Creating a rich sensory experience. Board games that excel in providing sensation affect players' senses in various ways to deliver a compelling aesthetic and tactile experience. High-quality components, beautifully illustrated cards, and detailed miniatures contribute significantly to this kind of fun. Games like Azul with its pleasingly bright and chunky tiles, Everdell with its charming 3D tree and intricate artwork, and Too Many Bones with its weighted poker chips demonstrates how sensory pleasures can enhance the enjoyment of the gameplay. 2. Fantasy. Building immersive worlds. Fantasy in board games allows players to step into another role or world, escaping reality for the duration of the game, and designing games with a strong thematic narrative where players feel immersed in a role or setting caters to this type of fun. Oathsworn, for example, plunges players into a dark, evolving fantasy world where their decisions have lasting consequences, allowing them to live out heroic adventures. 3. Narrative. Crafting engaging stories. Narrative fun comes from a game's ability to tell a story in which players feel actively involved. Integrating narratives that unfold as the game progresses can turn an ordinary game night into a memorable adventure. Games like Destinies, Stuffed Fables, and Pandemic Legacy allow players to impact and be part of an unfolding narrative over the course of one game or multiple sessions. 4. Challenge. Engaging players intellectually. Challenge is a fundamental aspect of many board games and involves providing players with obstacles that are satisfying to overcome. This can be achieved through strategic decision-making, puzzle-solving, or competition. Games like Last Bastion and The Captain is Dead require strategic planning and adaptation, while games in the Unlock series offer players a rigorous mental workout as they figure out various puzzles, all of which is intellectually rewarding and fun to a large segment of the gaming market. 5. Fellowship, fostering social interaction. Many players are drawn to board games primarily for social interaction. Games that promote fellowship allow players to engage in cooperation and/or competition, or simply socialize in a structured way. Eldritch Horror exemplifies this with its cooperative gameplay, requiring players to work together to save the world, enhancing both social interaction and teamwork. Codenames is another great example as players try to help each other make correct guesses using simply a word and a number with often comical results. 6. Discovery, exploring new frontiers. Games that encourage exploration and discovery tap into the joy of uncovering new strategies, secrets, or narrative elements. Designing games with dynamic environments or varied strategic possibilities can give players a sense of discovery in every game. Seventh Continent, with its massive number of map tiles to discover, takes players on an exploration-driven adventure, where each new tile provides something new to uncover. However, it can be just as fun to explore a game's core mechanism. For example, Dominion allows players to dive into the many nuances of deck building, and its enormous number of cards ensures that no two games are the same, continually offering new strategies to discover. 7. Expression, allowing personalization and self-discovery. Expression deals with the player's desire to project their identity into the game, through customization or strategic choices that reflect their personal style or values. Games like Dungeons & Dragons and other RPGs, role-playing games, allow users to create characters down to the finest detail and then occupy that character throughout a campaign with near infinite possibilities. 8. Submission, enjoying the act of play. Some games are enjoyed simply for the experience of playing, not necessarily for competition or achievement. These games are often relaxing and can be seen as a way to unwind. Mythwind is a great example, offering simple, cozy gameplay that doesn't demand too much mental strain, allowing players to relax and engage casually with the game and each other. Conclusion. Integrating these 8 types of fun into board game design isn't about packing all 8 into every game, but understanding your target audience and what kinds of fun will most appeal to them. By focusing on delivering specific types of fun effectively, you can create games that resonate more deeply with players, leading to experiences that are returned to and cherished for many years. And whether you're enhancing the sensory aspects of a game to heighten its physical appeal, or weaving intricate narratives that captivate and tell memorable stories, each type of fun offers unique pathways to enchanting the players and creating successful games. What's your best advice for how a designer can make a fun game? No game is for everyone, so don't bother trying to make a game for everyone. Make a game for your audience, no matter how small that audience is. Make a game that some people love and some people hate. Nikki Valens.